For truck drivers, the road is a friend, a lifeline, and sometimes a place where nightmares live. Across America, highways stretch for miles through darkness, fog, and desolation. And along these lonely roads, countless truckers have reported real horror encounters, figures that vanish into thin air, ghostly hitchhikers, strange lights, and the unmistakable feeling that something unseen is riding alongside them. Tonight, we explore 25 true horror encounters from American truck drivers, where the open road becomes a corridor to the unknown, and the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Buckle up, dear viewers. This is a ride you won't soon forget, stretching across the desert plains of Arizona. A remote stretch of Route 66 has earned a reputation among locals and travelers alike as a place where the ordinary intersects with the inexplicable. The road, once a vital artery connecting towns and travelers from Chicago to Los Angeles, now offers long stretches of isolation, dotted with abandoned gas stations, empty diners, and the occasional flickering neon sign. It is on this lonely highway that stories of the phantom hitchhiker have persisted for decades, a spectral woman in white who appears on the roadside, seemingly lost and seeking passage, only to vanish without explanation. Among the many encounters reported, one stands out for its eerie clarity and unsettling details. The story begins with a long-haul trucker making his usual run late at night, hauling freight across the desert under a sky littered with stars. He had driven for hours, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the wind rushing past the cab. Somewhere near a desolate stretch of Route 66, he noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, a young woman, dressed entirely in white, her posture straight, her hair long and flowing. She seemed to be waiting, lifting a hand to gesture for a ride. The driver, instinctively cautious but sympathetic, slowed and pulled his truck over, rolling down the window. The woman didn't speak at first. She simply stepped closer, her presence almost luminescent under the pale glow of the highway lights. The driver, feeling a mixture of curiosity and unease, opened the passenger door and gestured for her to climb in. She entered silently, her white dress brushing the seat, leaving no trace of dust or sand. The trucker tried to make conversation, asking where she was headed, but she offered no reply. Her face was calm, expressionless, and haunting in its stillness. The highway stretched on, empty and quiet, as the engine hummed beneath them. After a few minutes of tense silence, the driver glanced at the rearview mirror. In that instant, the woman had vanished. The seat beside him was empty, her presence gone without any indication of how or where she had disappeared. His heart raced, a mixture of fear and disbelief flooding his senses. He braked slightly, scanned the dark horizon, but saw no sign of her. The desert road remained empty, stretching endlessly under the night sky. The encounter left him shaken, a story he would recount many times to colleagues and friends. Yet he never could explain what he had seen. This account is part of a larger pattern of sightings along this portion of Route 66. Over the years, drivers have reported seeing a woman in white standing on the roadside, often near the same abandoned stretches of highway. Some accounts describe her with more detail: pale skin, long dark hair, eyes that seemed to glimmer in the headlights. Others focus on her attire, simple white dress, sometimes glowing as if lit from within. The appearances are fleeting, and the moment someone stops, the figure is gone. Witnesses often describe a cold draft, a shiver down the spine, or a sudden silence that descends over the cab or the surrounding desert, as if the encounter has temporarily shifted the natural order. Folklorists and paranormal researchers have long examined these reports, classifying the phantom hitchhiker as part of a broader tradition of vanishing hitchhiker legends across the United States. These stories often share key elements. A traveler encounters a seemingly lost woman, offers a ride, and within moments, she disappears, leaving behind only the echo of her presence. In some variations, drivers find objects left behind in the car: a scarf, a small purse, or a note, though in most Arizona cases, the figure vanishes completely, leaving no physical trace. The pattern of these sightings suggests a recurring narrative embedded in local memory, blending fear, sympathy, and the mystery of the open road. The desert environment of Arizona seems to amplify the sense of isolation and vulnerability that accompanies these encounters. Route 66 stretches for miles without any immediate towns or houses. The asphalt glints under the headlights, the surrounding landscape a blur of sand, rocks, and scattered vegetation. In the stillness of the night, even minor movements or distant lights can create the illusion of presence. Yet many witnesses, including experienced drivers and truckers, insist that what they have seen transcends ordinary perception. The encounters are vivid, precise, and emotionally charged, leaving lasting impressions that linger long after the truck or car has moved on. Local lore also ties the sightings to tragic stories from the past. Some versions of the legend suggest that the woman in white died in a car accident decades ago along the same stretch of Route 66. Others claim she was a runaway or a victim of violence, whose spirit now wanders the road, eternally seeking passage or resolution. These backstories, while impossible to verify, give the sightings a narrative texture, framing the encounters as echoes of human loss and unfinished business. For those who have seen her, the experience is rarely merely frightening, it's also deeply sorrowful, as if witnessing a fragment of history that has refused to rest. Truckers and night travelers often share tips for encountering the phantom hitchhiker. Some advise ignoring the figure, arguing that any attempt to interact may provoke unsettling experiences. Others suggest acknowledging her silently, respecting her presence without expecting explanation. Despite the caution, curiosity draws people to this stretch of highway, and the legend continues to grow with each new account. Travelers pass along stories, embellish details, and add personal interpretation, ensuring that the myth of the vanishing woman remains alive along the desert route. The phantom hitchhiker of Route 66 remains one of Arizona's most enduring roadside legends. She embodies the tension between isolation and companionship, danger and empathy, the living and the dead. Each encounter, whether brief or extended, leaves a lasting impression, a reminder that some roads carry more than asphalt and gravel. They carry memory, loss, and the subtle, haunting presence of a spirit who walks among the living, appearing just long enough to be noticed, then vanishing into the endless night. The story continues to captivate, terrify, and mystify, a symbol of the lonely stretches of the open road and the mysteries that linger along America's most famous highway. It was a quiet night on Interstate 5, the long spine of California that stretches from the Mexican border to Oregon. The road was nearly empty, the air heavy with the hum of the truck's engine and the faint crackle of radio static. The driver, a seasoned hauler named Rick Dalton, had been driving freight routes up and down the West Coast for 20 years. He had seen just about everything the road could offer: dense fog, runaway tires, reckless drivers, even the occasional UFO story shared over coffee at a truck stop. But nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered that night just north of Bakersfield. It was past midnight when he noticed something odd. His headlights swept over the dark asphalt, illuminating the white lines that stretched endlessly ahead. Then, in the distance, he saw a shape small at first, then growing clearer. A figure stood dead center in the lane, motionless, like a person waiting to cross. Rick squinted and eased off the accelerator. The figure didn't move. No reflective vest, no flashlight, no sign of distress, just a tall, dark silhouette framed in the beams of his headlights. He flicked his high beams to full, expecting to see the features of a stranded motorist or maybe a hitchhiker. But the light didn't reveal much, only a human shape, shadowy and still. The figure appeared to wear something old-fashioned, a long coat or perhaps a cloak, its edges fluttering faintly as if in a wind that didn't exist. Rick felt a prickle on his skin, the kind that warns of danger even before the mind catches up. He laid on the horn, the deep blast echoing into the emptiness. The figure didn't flinch. Rick slowed further, ready to swerve, if necessary. But when he was within 50 feet, it simply vanished. No motion, no blur, no sign of movement. 1 second it was there. The next, the highway was empty. Rick slammed the brakes, bringing his 18-wheeler to a hard stop. His heart pounded as he peered into the night. Nothing, no one. He switched on his hazard lights and stepped down from the cab, boots crunching on the pavement. The only sound was the tick of cooling metal and the low hum of passing wind across the valley. He scanned the shoulder, the ditch, the median nothing but sagebrush, and the occasional rustle of a faraway breeze. He stood there for several minutes, unsure what to think. A hallucination, a trick of fatigue. But he didn't feel tired. He felt alert, more awake than he had all night. He climbed back into the cab, uneasy but determined to keep going. As he pulled back onto the road, the CB radio crackled softly with static. He turned the dial, trying to find a clear channel. That's when he heard it. A whisper. At first, he thought it was interference. A soft, broken sound between bursts of white noise. But then it grew clearer, faint, deliberate murmur. The voice wasn't sharp enough to make out words, but it carried a tone, a voice that seemed to be saying his name. Rick, he froze. The whisper came again, sliding through the static like a sigh. Then another sound followed, something like a low moan, stretched and distant. He grabbed the microphone and asked if anyone else was on the channel. No reply, only that whisper, fading in and out, rising just long enough to send chills down his spine before dissolving into the hiss of static. Rick drove 4 miles with his eyes locked on the highway, checking his mirrors every few seconds. The figure didn't return, but the radio kept crackling. At one point, he swore he heard laughter, quiet, broken, echoing faintly as though coming from the depths of the radio itself. He shut it off. The silence was worse. The next morning, Rick stopped at a diner outside of Los Banos over coffee. He told the story to a fellow trucker who had heard his share of strange roadside tales. The man nodded knowingly and said, "You saw the ghost of I-5. Rick laughed it off, but the man continued. He said drivers had been seeing something for decades, a figure that appears on the stretch between Bakersfield and Stockton, usually late at night, often on foggy or moonless evenings. Some say it's a hitchhiker who was killed in the 1950s, a drifter who never made it home. Others claim it's the spirit of a trucker who fell asleep at the wheel and burned out on the asphalt in a fiery crash. A few even believe it's not a ghost at all, but a kind of energy echo-residual trauma replaying itself over and over on that same patch of road." Rick listened, unsettled. When he returned to his truck, he checked his dashcam footage, hoping to find evidence of the figure. But when he reviewed the video, the road was empty. No shadow, no human shape, just an unbroken stretch of highway. The only anomaly was the sound and odd burst of static that lasted for 12 seconds exactly, starting the moment he hit the brakes. That night, as he drove north through the Central Valley, the whispers returned. Faint at first, then clearer. This time, he could make out words. "Still here," it said, drawn out and quiet, as if coming from behind him. Rick pulled the mic again and shouted for anyone listening. No response. He kept the radio off after that, his nerves fraying as the hours passed. The road was a black ribbon beneath his headlights, the world reduced to the hum of tires and the soft pulse of fear in his chest. When dawn finally broke over the horizon, he exhaled deeply, as if waking from a long, vivid dream. But when he parked at the freight depot in Sacramento, he noticed something odd on the trailer door, a single handprint, dusty and faint, pressed into the metal. It wasn't his. Today, truckers still talk about the figure on I-5. Some say they've seen it standing in the road. Others swear it appears in their rearview mirrors just before vanishing. A few claim they've heard that same whisper through the static, a lonely voice that echoes across the night, searching for someone who might finally listen. And those who have heard it never forget the feeling that somewhere, between the miles and the dark, something unseen is still traveling that endless road, waiting to be noticed. It was a clear Nebraska night, the kind where the horizon stretches endlessly beneath a vault of stars, and the only company for miles is the hum of tires on asphalt. Long-haul trucker Mike Enders was hauling refrigerated goods east along Interstate 80, just past Kearney, when something strange caught his eye. About a mile ahead, he saw bright orange cones reflecting his headlights, marking what looked like a construction zone. Yellow lights flashed in the distance, and he slowed as the highway narrowed into a single lane. It wasn't unusual. Roadwork on I-80 was constant. Nebraska's vast stretches were always being patched, widened, or rerouted. But this setup looked different. The cones weren't quite aligned. Some leaned at odd angles as though hastily placed. As Mike eased closer, he spotted figures in reflective vests waving flashlights, signaling him to detour right. He rolled down his window, the night air cool and dry. One of the workers stepped closer, raising a gloved hand. "Single lane ahead. Stay right," the man shouted over the low rumble of the engine. His voice was clear but strangely hollow, almost echoing despite the open space around them. Mike nodded, followed the cones through the makeshift detour, and glanced in his side mirror as he passed. He could see at least 3 workers moving along the shoulder, one operating what looked like a small backhoe, another holding a clipboard. The scene was ordinary, almost mundane, and yet something about it felt slightly off. Maybe it was the silence between the movements, or how the flashing lights seemed dimmer than normal, like their batteries were fading. After a few miles, the detour merged back into the main highway. Mike accelerated, the construction zone fading behind him. But when he checked his GPS, he noticed something odd. The map didn't show any active construction in that area. In fact, it showed the road as completely clear. He frowned, assuming the system was outdated, and drove on. 2 hours later, he realized he had missed a scheduled stop and decided to turn back. He made a U-turn at the next exit and headed west. The night was even quieter now, the landscape vast and still. When he approached the area where he had seen the crew, he slowed again. The flashing yellow lights were gone. The cones were gone. Even the equipment had vanished. The only sign that anything had been there was a strip of disturbed dirt along the shoulder, freshly turned, but smooth. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest human presence. Mike pulled over and stepped out, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The air was perfectly still. No wind, no distant engines, just the low hum of the truck's idling motor. He shone his flashlight across the scene. The ground was uneven, as if something heavy had scraped across it, but the pattern didn't make sense. The disturbed soil formed a kind of arc leading off toward the ditch, then abruptly stopped. Mike crouched down. Touching the dirt, it was damp, recently dug, yet there was no equipment, no shovels, no sign of where it had come from. He stood and scanned the road again. Nothing. No vehicles, no lights, not even the faint glow of taillights on the horizon. It was as if the entire crew had vanished into thin air. Feeling uneasy, he climbed back into the cab and radioed other drivers on his channel. "Hey, anyone else run through that construction on I-80 around mile marker 278? He asked. Static answered first, then a voice replied, "What construction? That stretch has been empty for months." Mike hesitated. "No, I passed through it about 2 hours ago. Crew out there, cones, detour, the works." Another trucker chimed in. "You sure you didn't dream it? Ain't been any road work there all season. Weather's too cold now for fresh asphalt." He fell silent. His GPS had shown no detour, but he'd seen it with his own eyes. The vests, the lights, the machinery, it had all looked real. He decided to press on, chalking it up to fatigue, or perhaps some temporary crew that had packed up early. Still, the unease stayed with him, a tightness in his chest that wouldn't fade. The next morning, after a restless sleep at a truck stop, Mike mentioned what he saw to a highway patrol officer grabbing coffee at the counter. The officer frowned and said quietly, "You said around marker 278. When Mike nodded, the officer leaned in. "There used to be a road crew killed there about 15 years ago. Early morning fog. A semi came through the zone without slowing down, wiped out 3 workers instantly. After that, they stopped using night shifts in that section." Mike felt his stomach twist. "You're saying what I saw?" The officer shrugged. "People have reported lights there before. Drivers swear they see workers waving them through. Cones set up. Sometimes even hear the sound of machinery. But when we check it out, nothing. Just a dirt, like someone's been digging." Later that day, curiosity got the better of him. Mike checked the local paper archives online and found the story. October 2008, a fatal accident near that very mile marker. Photos showed the aftermath: cones scattered, an overturned backhoe, the twisted wreckage of a pickup. The names of the victims were listed. 3 men in their 30s. Local workers repairing a drainage line under the highway. The article noted one eerie detail. The patch of ground where the men died had been disturbed repeatedly over the years since the accident, though no official construction had been scheduled there. Locals claimed they sometimes saw lights moving across the field at night, like lanterns swaying in invisible hands. That evening, Mike drove the same route again. He slowed near the marker, scanning the sides of the road. The ground was still freshly churned, as if dug up just hours earlier. In the beam of his headlights, something glinted: a fragment of orange plastic, the corner of a safety cone, half buried in the dirt. He got out, picked it up, and felt a sudden chill run down his spine. Then he heard it, faint, distant, but unmistakable, the rhythmic beeping of a truck in reverse, echoing somewhere in the empty darkness. The sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving only silence and the weight of the night pressing down. He dropped the cone fragment, climbed back into his truck, and drove away, refusing to look back. To this day, truckers on I-80 still share stories of the vanishing road crew. Some see flickering lights in the distance. Others describe men in reflective vests, flagging them through invisible detours. And when investigators arrive, they find nothing but disturbed soil and silence stretching across the Nebraska plains. Those who have seen it say the same thing. It feels less like a haunting, and more like a job that never ended: a crew, still working through the night, forever waiting for dawn that never comes. Stretching through the evergreen forests and winding valleys of Washington state, certain stretches of highway are notorious for dense, rolling fog that can appear without warning. Drivers on these roads are often cautious, navigating the low visibility and slick pavement. But one stretch has gained an eerie reputation for something far stranger than fog alone. Known among truckers and local drivers as the site of the foggy highway light, this portion of the road has been the scene of numerous reports involving unexplained phenomena, notably a bright, hovering light that moves in ways no vehicle could. One trucker's encounter remains one of the most detailed and chilling accounts, combining isolation, the surreal effects of fog, and the inexplicable behavior of a mysterious light that seemed to possess awareness. The trucker was on a routine overnight run, hauling freight along a stretch of highway cutting through the dense forests of western Washington. The fog had already begun to settle in by the time he entered the area, reducing visibility to just a few hundred feet. The cab was quiet, the hum of the engine the only steady sound, and the narrow beams of headlights reflected off the moisture-laden air, creating halos that seemed to distort the familiar roadway. It was in this surreal environment that he first noticed a bright light ahead, centered directly in his lane. At first, he assumed it was the headlights of another vehicle, though unusual in intensity and sharpness. As he slowed, the light remained stationary in the fog, floating slightly above the pavement as though it were suspended rather than grounded. The color was bright white, almost luminous, with an otherworldly clarity that cut through the dense mist. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and adjusted his visor, thinking fatigue or condensation might be distorting his perception, but the light remained. Cautiously, he reduced speed, unsure whether to swerve around the light or stop. As he did, something stranger occurred. The light moved in tandem with his truck. It shifted slightly to match the vehicle's trajectory, maintaining a precise distance alongside the cab. It was not like any car or motorcycle he had ever encountered. It made no sound, emitted no heat, and displayed none of the familiar indicators of a human-driven vehicle. It glided effortlessly through the fog, moving with an intelligence that was impossible to explain. The trucker's heart pounded, a mixture of fear and disbelief gripping him. He tried to communicate over the CB radio, thinking perhaps another driver or a road maintenance crew was operating some unusual equipment, but the channels were dead, filled only with static and faint echoes that carried no meaning. Every attempt to make sense of the situation heightened the tension. The light continued to hover beside him, bright and steady, reflecting faintly on the cab's metallic surfaces. It seemed aware of his presence, following him without deviation, yet never approaching too closely. Moments later, as the trucker cautiously slowed further, the light began to recede slightly, retreating into the dense fog as though aware of the cab's movement. Within seconds, it vanished entirely, leaving only the thick, opaque mist surrounding the truck. The highway returned to its normal quiet, punctuated only by the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional rustle of nearby trees. The trucker sat for several tense minutes, trying to comprehend what had just occurred, his pulse gradually slowing but his mind racing with questions. There was no trace of the light remaining, no discernible source, and no other vehicles around to account for the phenomenon. This encounter is part of a series of reports that have emerged from truckers, commuters, and night travelers along this stretch of Washington highways. Many describe bright lights appearing in the fog, seemingly hovering or moving in ways inconsistent with ordinary vehicles. Some report lights pacing alongside their trucks, following them for moments before disappearing without a trace. Others mention sudden changes in the fog density, cold drafts, or a sense of being observed, heightening the surreal experience of navigating the highway under such conditions. The dense fog itself seems to amplify the phenomenon. Fog can create optical illusions, diffusing light and making ordinary objects appear larger, closer, or in unusual positions. Yet multiple accounts emphasize the intelligence and deliberate movement of the light, behavior that ordinary optical illusions cannot explain. Drivers often note that the light seems to anticipate their movements, adjusting its position to maintain a precise proximity or trajectory. The consistency of these descriptions across independent accounts adds weight to the idea that something truly unusual is occurring along this stretch of road. Physical sensations often accompany these sightings. Witnesses describe sudden chills, the feeling of tension pressing against the chest, and even a subtle vibration or hum in the cab when the light is near. Some drivers report hearing faint, high-pitched tones or whispers carried on the wind, though the source is never identifiable. These sensory effects, combined with the visual phenomenon, create an immersive and unnerving experience that many describe as one of the most unsettling encounters of their driving careers. Folklore and speculation surrounding the foggy highway light are widespread. Some suggest the light is the ghost of a past traveler who perished on the highway. A residual energy manifesting in luminous form to guide or perhaps warn those who passed. Others believe it may be a type of unexplained atmospheric anomaly, an electrical or electromagnetic phenomenon amplified by moisture and topography. Truckers and local residents share stories, warning newcomers to respect the fog, remain alert, and accept that not all highway occurrences can be explained by science. Despite the fear it inspires, the phenomenon has become a defining feature of the road for those who traverse it at night. The memory of the hovering light lingers long after the encounter, a blend of awe, dread, and curiosity. Drivers who have experienced it often speak of it with a mixture of reverence and caution, acknowledging that the highway can be a place where reality shifts unexpectedly, and where the fog may conceal something far more enigmatic than mere weather. The foggy highway light remains an enduring mystery of Washington state's roadways. For the trucker who witnessed it, the memory is vivid: the bright, hovering presence, the precise movement alongside the cab, and the sudden disappearance into mist. It is a reminder that even on familiar roads, the ordinary can give way to the extraordinary. That isolation and the night can reveal phenomena that defy logic, and that some lights on the highway are not bound by the rules of the physical world. For those traveling through the dense fog, the highway is more than asphalt and trees. It is a corridor where the unknown occasionally chooses to reveal itself, bright and fleeting, before vanishing into the mist. Along the sprawling highways of Texas, long stretches of road cut through empty plains, scrubland, and isolated towns, offering little more than asphalt, sky, and occasional rest stops. While these stops are meant to provide weary travelers with a brief respite, some have become the stage 4 stories, far stranger than fatigue or isolation would suggest. One particular incident, reported by a truck driver at a desolate rest stop, has grown into a legend among long-haul drivers and local lore. It is a story of figures that appear and vanish, leaving witnesses questioning reality, memory, and the quiet emptiness of the Texas night. The trucker was on a routine overnight haul, driving through West Texas under a sky so dark it seemed to swallow the horizon. The heat of the day had long since faded, leaving only a cool breeze that rustled through the dry brush surrounding the highway. He had been on the road for hours, the monotony of asphalt and faint distant lights pressing heavily on his mind. Recognizing the need for a short break, he spotted a small, abandoned rest stop, a place that seemed deserted even during normal hours. Parking his truck near the edge of the lot, he cut the engine and stepped into the stillness, immediately noticing a strange calm that hung over the area. As he approached the benches near the small pavilion, he noticed movement, or rather, the suggestion of it. Figures were sitting quietly, their postures slumped as if resting, shadows against the dim glow of a lone street lamp. At first, he assumed they were fellow travelers, perhaps other truckers taking a late-night break. The benches had been empty when he first looked, but now the forms were unmistakable. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and focused, noting the outline of their shoulders, heads, and faintly visible legs. Even from a distance, the figures seemed eerily still, too quiet for living people. Curiosity and a growing sense of unease prompted him to approach. Step by step, he drew closer, expecting to see tired travelers, maybe someone nodding off on the benches. Yet, when he reached the edge of the pavilion, the figures were gone. The benches sat empty, not a single person in sight. There was no movement, no shuffling, no sound of footsteps retreating. Only the empty concrete, the scattered leaves in the wind, and the dim illumination from the lamp overhead remained. The sudden disappearance sent a shiver down his spine. He looked around, scanning the rest of the parking area, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. Perplexed and uneasy, he returned to his truck, glancing back at the benches periodically. The encounter lingered in his mind, a ghostly impression that refused to vanish. Later, after submitting a routine report about his stop, he learned that security cameras installed at the rest area had recorded the incident. What the footage revealed only deepened the mystery. On the video, faint, shadowy outlines appeared on the benches, forming the shapes of seated figures. The images were intermittent, flickering in and out of frame, sometimes stretching into motion and sometimes dissolving entirely. At no point did the outlines resemble anything recognizable as a living person moving naturally. The video confirmed what he had seen in person: forms that seemed present one moment, gone the next, leaving no evidence beyond their spectral outlines. This encounter is part of a broader pattern of strange phenomena reported at abandoned or rarely used rest stops along highways, particularly in remote areas of Texas. Drivers have recounted seeing figures seated on benches, standing near vending machines, or walking along empty pathways, only to find nothing upon closer inspection. Often, these figures appear in peripheral vision, fleeting and indistinct, vanishing before direct observation is possible. Video footage, when available, sometimes corroborates the sightings in unsettling ways: faint shadows, blurred outlines, or ghostly forms that cannot be identified, shifting in and out of view without explanation. The desolation of these rest stops seems to amplify the phenomena. At night, when the heat of the day has dissipated and the highways are nearly empty, the stillness and isolation create an environment where perception is heightened. Small movements, shadows cast by lone lights, and the natural effects of fatigue can all play tricks on the mind. Yet the trucker's account, confirmed by security footage, suggests something beyond ordinary illusion. The forms were consistently visible both to the naked eye and on video, exhibiting patterns that suggest awareness or presence rather than random visual distortion. Many drivers who travel these remote highways report additional sensory experiences accompanying such encounters. Some describe sudden chills, a feeling of being watched, or a pressure in the cab of their vehicles. Others report subtle sounds, whispers carried on the wind, the faint scuff of shoes across concrete, or the distant hum of voices that fade when approached. For those who witness the figures directly, the experience is both unnerving and compelling, leaving an impression that persists long after the truck has departed the rest area. Local folklore has woven these reports into a broader narrative of haunted highways and abandoned stops. Some suggest that the figures are spirits of travelers who died along the route, lingering at rest stops as echoes of past journeys. Others speculate that the forms are residual energy, imprints left on locations marked by human fatigue, isolation, or emotional intensity. Whatever the explanation, the stories continue to be shared, passed from trucker to trucker, building a tradition of caution and curiosity about certain stretches of Texas roadway. For the trucker who first reported the encounter, the memory remains vivid, the moment of noticing the figures, the approach that revealed their absence, and the faint outlines captured on camera. The experience transformed a routine stop into an encounter with the inexplicable, a reminder that even the most mundane locations can hold mysteries beyond understanding. The rest stop, silent and empty by day, becomes a place where presence and absence intermingle, where the quiet of the night gives shape to shadows, and where travelers may glimpse the lingering traces of something unseen. The abandoned rest stop encounter stands as a testament to the strange and unpredictable phenomena that appear along America's highways. For those who witness it, the experience is a blend of awe, fear, and fascination, fleeting glimpse into a world that coexists with our own, present only for a moment before vanishing into the night. On the remote roads of Texas, the benches may be empty, the lights dim, and the highway quiet. But for those who pay attention, the unseen is never truly gone. It was just after midnight when long-haul driver Clint Harris rolled through the vast emptiness of central Montana, hauling a load of farm equipment east along Highway 2. The sky stretched endlessly above him, a dark ocean of stars shimmering over the open plains. The road was quiet, the kind of silence that made even the steady hum of the diesel engine sound too loud. Out here, there were no streetlights, no towns for miles, just a highway cutting through the frozen emptiness of the Montana night. Clint had been driving this route for years and thought he knew every bend and rise in the road. But that night, something strange happened that would stay with him forever. Around 1:30 a.m., as he crested a long, gradual hill near the Judith Basin, he spotted lights ahead several sets, low and steady, moving in perfect formation. At first he thought it was a military convoy. The lights were lined up in a tight pattern, their beams parallel and synchronized, stretching across both lanes and the shoulder. He slowed slightly, checking his mirrors. There hadn't been another vehicle in sight for nearly an hour, and the CB radio was dead quiet. The air outside was still, no wind, no sound except the engine. As he approached, the lights remained steady, maybe a mile away now, each one glowing a dim yellow-white, not the bright LED glare of modern trucks. Clint keyed his radio. Convoy up ahead. Anyone got eyes on that? Static answered him. He tried another channel, then another. Nothing. No chatter. No background noise, just the faint hiss of empty air. As he drew closer, he realized there were 6 trucks traveling side by side, perfectly spaced, maintaining the same speed. Their headlights illuminated the pavement, but he couldn't make out the vehicles themselves, only their outlines and reflections. It was eerie how smoothly they moved, no wobbling, no staggering between lanes, almost mechanical. He flashed his high beams twice, a standard signal to alert drivers ahead. No reaction. The lights continued to glide forward as if unaware of him. He honked once, a low blare that echoed across the plains, but there was no movement, no acknowledgement. Then, without warning, the convoy began to fade. The trucks didn't swerve, didn't vanish all at once, they simply dimmed, one by one, as though their headlights were being turned off in sequence. The far left one disappeared first, then the next, then another, until only a single set of lights remained in the center of the road. Clint gripped the wheel, his pulse quickening. The last truck flickered once, and then nothing. The highway was empty again, his own headlights stretching into blackness. He slowed to a crawl, staring ahead. There were no taillights, no reflective tape, no tire tracks, just miles of smooth asphalt bathed in pale moonlight. He thought for a moment that maybe he had seen mirage, his light distortion from the cold air, but the formation had been too clear, too precise. He pulled onto the shoulder and shut off the engine. The silence was absolute, the kind that feels heavy in your chest. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the frosty gravel, and looked down the road. Nothing moved. The only sound was a faint ping of cooling metal from his truck. For a few minutes, he stood there, scanning the horizon, expecting the lights to return. But they didn't. The sky was vast and empty, and the highway stretched in both directions like a dark ribbon into infinity. Finally, shaken and confused, Clint climbed back into the cab and continued driving, his eyes flicking nervously to the mirrors every few seconds. By dawn, he reached a rest area near Havre and told another driver about what he'd seen. The man listened quietly, then said, "You're not the first, buddy. That stretch of road's been weird for years." He went on to explain that other truckers had reported similar sightings, a line of old semis traveling in formation, sometimes seen just before dawn, other times in the middle of the night. Always silent, always vanishing before anyone could catch up. Intrigued and unsettled, Clint later contacted a local paranormal group based out of Great Falls. They had collected stories from dozens of drivers along Montana's highways 2 and 87, describing ghostly vehicles, phantom headlights that appear in the distance, keep pace for miles, and then fade into nothing. One investigator, a man named David Lang, told him about a legend known among old truckers as the Phantom Convoy. According to stories passed down since the 1960s, a line of 6 trucks once vanished during a blizzard near that same stretch. They had been hauling military supplies and reportedly lost contact during whiteout conditions. None of the vehicles were ever found. Some said they were swept into a frozen river, others that they took a wrong turn into an unmarked road and never returned. Lang explained that sightings of spectral trucks often happen near locations tied to fatal wrecks or disappearances. The theory among paranormal researchers is that certain highways retain residual energy, moments of tragedy replaying themselves over and over, like a ghostly film. Sometimes, Lang said, the road remembers. Skeptics had their own explanations. Some blamed light refraction in the cold air, where temperature layers bend headlights from distant vehicles to appear closer or duplicated. Others suggested fatigue or visual illusions from staring too long at the road's vanishing point. Still, none could explain why the lights seemed to move in perfect unison, fading with unnatural precision. For Clint, the memory wouldn't fade. Months later, he was still haunted by the image of those silent trucks gliding across the Montana plain. Once, he even dreamed about them, 6 rigs side by side under a sky heavy with snow. Their engines idling without sound, drivers invisible behind darkened glass. In the dream, he tried to call out, but no voice came, and one by one, the lights winked out until only darkness remained. Since then, other drivers have come forward with similar stories. Some report seeing the convoy in mirrors, trailing behind them for miles before disappearing when they look back. Others claim to have passed through what felt like a sudden pocket of cold air just before the lights appeared. A few insist that they heard faint CB chatterold voices calling out route numbers and weather conditions, using radio handles that haven't been used in decades. Locals say that on certain nights, when fog rolls in off the plains and the wind dies down, you can still see the glow of headlights drifting silently across the horizon, too many to be a single truck, too perfectly aligned to be random. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the Montana highways carry more than just freight and travelers. They carry memories of those lost to storms, to accidents, to endless miles of lonely road. And somewhere out there, between the cold stars and the blacktop, the Phantom Convoy keeps rolling, forever on a journey with no destination, vanishing into the night before dawn breaks again. It was just after 2 in the morning when Highway Patrol dispatcher records placed Tom Riley's pickup somewhere along Nevada's Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America. The desert stretched endlessly around him, an ocean of sand and stone under a wide, star-cluttered sky. The moon hung low, spilling pale light over the empty 2-lane stretch, and the only sounds were the rumble of his engine and the low whistle of the wind sneaking through the cracks of his truck's cabin. He had driven this route dozens of times before, hauling parts between Ely and Fallon, But that night something felt different off somehow, though he couldn't explain why. The desert has a way of playing tricks on the mind. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, distances warp in the heat, and at night the silence can make even the smallest sound seem close and menacing. But Tom wasn't new to it. He knew the road, the way the cold crept in after sundown, and how headlights could catch the glint of animal eyes before they darted away into the scrub. That familiarity made what happened next all the more disturbing. He was halfway between Austin and Middlegate when he first saw it. Out of nowhere, something moved across the edge of his high beams of shape, fast and human-sized, sprinting from one side of the road to the other. It wasn't an animal. The outline was too upright, the stride too deliberate. It was gone before his brain had even processed what he was seeing. Reflexively, Tom slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched, rubber burned, and the truck shuddered to a stop. Heart pounding, he stared out through the windshield. The road ahead was empty. No movement, no figure, just the endless desert. He blinked hard, trying to convince himself it had been a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from his own truck, or a tumbleweed caught at the right angle. But something about it had been wrong. The way it moved. Too quick, too defined, too human. He reached for his flashlight, stepped out of the cab, and immediately felt the temperature drop. The warm night air had turned unnaturally cold, like stepping into a freezer. His breath came out in faint clouds, though the dashboard thermometer had read 50 degrees just minutes earlier. A chill crawled up his spine, slow and deliberate, as though invisible fingers were running along his neck. He swept the flashlight beam across the road. The sand glowed pale in the light. There were no footprints, no disturbed patches of soil, no sign of anything crossing at all. He walked to the center of the highway, shining the beam out toward the desert's edge. The brush was still. No sound of movement, no wind through the yucca, no insects, just silence, thick and heavy. Then he saw it again. Not clearly this time, just a flicker, something shifting at the edge of vision, a darkness against the lighter sand. The shadows seemed to ripple and sink, melting down into the ground like smoke dispersing. He froze, every instinct screaming at him to get back in the truck. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest. The silence deepened until he could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He backed up slowly, eyes fixed on the place where the shape had vanished. The beam of his flashlight trembled in his hand. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding too loud, too foreign in the stillness. No answer. The sand lay undisturbed, perfectly smooth, as if nothing had ever moved through it. Tom climbed back into the cab and locked the doors out of habit. The temperature inside still felt icy. He turned the key, and the engine hesitated before catching. For a second, the radio sputtered to life, just static. No signal this far out. But beneath the static, he thought he heard something. A whisper. It wasn't clear enough to make out, but it had a rhythm, a pattern, almost like words just out of reach. He turned the radio off immediately. When he started driving again, he couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching him. The back of his neck prickled. Every time he checked his mirrors, he half expected to see something following his shadow, running along the road behind him, keeping pace. But there was nothing there. Just a long ribbon of asphalt fading into the desert night. By the time he reached the next gas station, an hour later, Tom's hands were still shaking. The attendant, an older man with weathered skin and a coffee mug in hand, noticed his pale face and asked if he was all right. Tom hesitated, then told him what he'd seen. The man listened quietly, eyes narrowing. "You said it melted into the sand?" the attendant asked after a moment. When Tom nodded, the man sighed and looked out the window, toward the dark stretch of highway. "You're not the first. Folks talk about that shadow out there. Been around since the old mining days. Some say it's the spirit of a man who got lost crossing the desert and never made it to the next town. Others say it's something older, something that doesn't want to be seen." Tom frowned. "Like what?" The attendant shook his head. "Out here, things move that ain't supposed to. People used to call it the shadow walker. It shows up in the headlights, sometimes crosses the road, sometimes just stands and stares. Always vanishes when you stop. Never leaves tracks. He went on to say that the locals believed the desert held echoes of those who died trying to cross it, miners, travelers, settlers who'd wandered too far under the blistering sun and were swallowed by the sands. "This land remembers," the man said softly. "You drive long enough out here, it'll show you something it's kept hidden." Tom stayed longer than he needed to, sipping coffee just to steady his nerves. When he finally got back on the road, the horizon was turning pale with the first signs of dawn. The cold had lifted, and the desert began to glow faintly gold. For a moment, he dared to believe that the night's events were just exhaustion and tricks of the eyes. But then, as the sun broke over the distant hills, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw a shape flicker across the highway behind him, a dark, human outline darting from one side to the other before dissolving into the sand once more. He gripped the wheel tighter and didn't stop until he reached Fallon. To this day, truckers and desert travelers speak of the Shadow Crossing, that stretch of Nevada highway where human-shaped darkness runs across the road under the moonlight and vanishes without a trace. Some call it a ghost, others a mirage, but those who've seen it all describe the same thing: a sudden chill crawling up the spine, a silence that swallows sound, and the feeling that the desert itself is watching. It was just after midnight when long-haul trucker Steve Callahan pulled into a small truck stop off Interstate 40 in western Oklahoma. The night was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rain that had passed through earlier. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed faintly, casting an eerie white glow over the cracked pavement. Steve had been driving since dawn, and exhaustion was beginning to settle deep into his bones. He needed fuel, coffee, and a few hours of rest before continuing east toward Arkansas. As he rolled his rig toward the pumps, he noticed a man standing near the lot entrance. The figure wore a reflective vest and a ball cap pulled low over his eyes. He waved Steve forward with an easy, practiced motion, guiding him toward a wide parking spot at the far end of the lot. Steve nodded his thanks through the windshield. The attendant gave a quick smile, then gestured toward the fuel station as if to say, "You're good here." When Steve climbed down from the cab, the man greeted him in a warm Oklahoma drawl. "Long night, huh? You'll want to park up for a bit. Roads are slick past Weatherford." Steve chuckled. "You got that right. Feels like I've been driving through soup all day." The man nodded and pointed toward the diner attached to the station. "Coffee's fresh inside. I'll keep an eye on your rig if you're planning to crash for a few hours." Appreciative, Steve thanked him and walked toward the diner. He noticed a man's name tag in the dim light tray. The letters were faded, but clear enough to read. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A few drivers sat hunched over their meals, the clink of utensils echoing softly. The waitress poured him coffee without a word, and the warmth was welcome against the chill that seemed to cling to his jacket. After eating, he headed back to his truck, planning to grab a few hours of sleep before dawn. The parking lot was quiet when he returned. Ray stood near the edge of the lot, his orange vest faintly glowing in the fluorescent light. He gave a friendly nod as Steve climbed into the cab and shut off the engine. As fatigue took over, the steady hum of the truck stop faded into the background, distant trucks idling, the occasional hiss of air brakes, the whisper of wind moving through the lot. When Steve woke, the sun hadn't risen yet. His watch read for 17 a.m. The world outside was still and gray, wrapped in fog. He rubbed his eyes and decided to stretch his legs before hitting the road. That's when he noticed something strange. The lights over the lot flickered weakly, and the air felt cold, and naturally so. His breath came out in faint clouds. He stepped down onto the pavement, instantly aware that the warm Oklahoma night air from before had vanished. The temperature felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. He glanced around, looking for Ray. The lot was empty. The spot where Ray had stood earlier was bare, though the ground there seemed darker, damp, as if from melted frost. Steve frowned, pulling his jacket tighter as a shiver crawled up his spine. He walked toward the fuel pumps, half expecting to see the attendant checking gauges or cleaning, but no one was there. The entire truck stop was silent, no engines, no voices, not even the buzzing of the overhead lights. He decided to go inside the diner, hoping to see the waitress again or someone who could explain the sudden emptiness. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, but the counter was deserted. Coffee pots sat untouched, steam long gone. The clock on the wall ticked softly in the silence. After a few minutes, the front door creaked open behind him. Another driver stepped in, yawning. Steve turned to him and asked, "Hey, where's the guy who was out in the lot earlier?" "The attendant, Ray, I think his name was." The driver gave him a puzzled look. "There's no one working outside, man. Hasn't been anyone on night shift here for years. They just leave the pumps on auto. You pay inside." Steve blinked. "No, he was right out there. Helped me park. Wore a reflective vest. Name tag," said Ray. The man frowned, then motioned toward the counter. "Ask her." The waitress had returned, wiping her hands on a towel. When Steve asked again, her expression changed. "Ray," she repeated quietly. "Honey, you must be mistaken. Ray was the night manager here years ago. Died in an accident truck. Backed over him out in that lot. Happened around this time of year, actually." The diner went silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Steve felt a coldness creep deeper into his chest. "That can't be right," he said softly. "I talked to him. He told me to park and get some coffee. Said he'd watch my truck." The waitress shook her head. "People have said they've seen him before, especially drivers coming in late. He was a friendly man, always helping folks get parked safe. Guess he never stopped." Steve went back outside, his pulse pounding. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing faint footprints leading from where Ray had stood toward the pumps. They were shallow, vanishing after only a few steps. He crouched down, touching one. It was cold, the ground beneath slightly damp, as if ice had melted there. A sudden gust of wind swept across the lot, carrying with it a low whispering sound, faint, almost like someone exhaling close to his ear. He spun around. Nothing but that cold aura remained, wrapping around him like invisible frost. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and turned on the heater. The dashboard lights flickered for a moment before stabilizing. As he pulled out of the lot, he glanced into the side mirror one last time. For a brief moment, he saw him, again, Ray, standing near the pumps, vest glowing faintly under the lights, arm raised in a slow wave. When Steve blinked, the figure was gone. Later that morning, he stopped at another station down the road and told a few fellow drivers what had happened. One of them nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's the vanishing attendant. Lots of guys seen him. They say if you're tired or heading into bad weather, he shows up to guide you in. But he's not really there, just a ghost doing what he did best." Steve didn't argue. He couldn't. The memory of that friendly voice, that wave, and the sudden drop in temperature were too vivid to dismiss. Even now, years later, he swears that the man who helped him park that night wasn't just a trick of exhaustion. Some truckers believe Ray's spirit lingers to keep others safe, watching over those who drive the same lonely stretch of highway where he lost his life. Others think the cold that follows him is a warning, a reminder of how quickly life can vanish on the road. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. When you pull into that quiet Oklahoma truck stop late at night, and a friendly attendant waves you toward a space under the flickering lights, you might want to thank him. Because if the air suddenly turns cold, and your breath fogs in front of you, you may have just met the ghost of Ray, the vanishing truck stop employee who never truly clocked out. It was a damp, moonless night deep in the Ozark Mountains when trucker Daniel Reeves found himself on a stretch of Highway 23 that seemed to twist endlessly through the darkness. The route was known to locals as the Pig Trail, narrow, winding, and haunted by more than just wild deer. Fog hung low over the road, thick as smoke, and his headlights carved a pale path through the mist. It was the kind of night that felt older than time itself, where the world beyond the trees seemed to hold its breath. Daniel had been driving long-haul routes for nearly 20 years. He'd seen strange things on the road, mirages on the desert highway, ghostly hitchhikers that vanished when he slowed to stop, but nothing compared to what he saw that night in the Ozarks. He had just passed a faded sign for a place called Kingston Hollow when something caught his eye in the rearview mirror, a soft, blue-white glow hovering above the tree line. At first, he thought it might be another vehicle, maybe a set of headlights reflecting off the fog. But as the glow grew brighter, it divided into three distinct orbs, each one pulsing with a strange, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. Curiosity got the better of him. He slowed his truck, rolling down the window to listen. The only sounds were the engine's low hum and the distant chirping of crickets. The lights moved again, this time drifting across the road about a quarter-mile ahead. They hovered there for a moment before darting upward in a quick, zigzagging motion that no plane or drone could ever make. "What in the world?" Daniel muttered under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He eased the truck forward, following the lights at a cautious speed. They seemed to dance just ahead of him, almost playful, as if leading him somewhere deeper into the forested hills. Every few seconds, they'd vanish behind the trees, only to reappear a little farther up the road. He couldn't help but feel as though they wanted him to follow. After about 5 minutes, the lights stopped moving. They hovered low over a bend in the road, where the asphalt gave way to a sharp drop-off into a ravine. Daniel slowed to a crawl. The orbs flickered brighter, then dimmed all at once, disappearing completely. In the sudden darkness, his headlights swept across the bend, and that's when he saw it. Part of the guardrail ahead was missing. The twisted metal hung over the edge of the ravine, still scarred and bent as if something massive had plowed through it. A wreck, maybe. A shiver ran through him. He parked the truck and climbed out, the cold air biting through his jacket. When he stepped closer to the edge, he could just make out the faint outline of an old vehicle down ballasted, half buried among the trees. The scene looked decades old. Daniel's chest tightened. It hit him that if he hadn't slowed to follow those lights, he might have taken that same curve too fast and gone over the edge himself. He turned back toward his rig, but just before he climbed in, he caught sight of the lights again. They had reappeared farther down the ravine, three pale orbs floating in silence above the wreck. For a moment, they glowed brighter, illuminating the crushed metal below. Then, slowly, they drifted upward through the trees, fading into the mist until the forest swallowed them whole. When Daniel finally reached a small diner on the outskirts of Huntsville later that night, he couldn't shake the image from his mind. He told the story to the waitress pouring his coffee, a gray-haired woman with the calm, knowing look of someone who'd lived her entire life in those hills. She listened quietly, then nodded. "You saw the Ozark lights," she said. "You're not the first." He frowned. "What are they?" "Depends who you ask," she replied. "Some say it's swamp gas or car lights bouncing off the fog. Others say it's something older. Spirits, maybe those who died on the mountain roads. They say the lights show up to warn travelers before something bad happens." Daniel told her about the broken guardrail and the wreck below. Her eyes softened. "That was the Turner family," she said. "Car went off the road back in '79. No one made it out. Folks around here say those lights started showing up not long after." He sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the diner's neon sign mixing with the clatter of dishes. The logical part of his mind wanted to dismiss it: fog, reflection, exhaustion. But another part, the one that had seen the lights hovering like sentinels above the ravine, couldn't let go of what he'd witnessed. Later, before heading out, he asked the woman one last question. "You ever seen them yourself?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Once. My brother and I were driving through the hollow late at night. Saw the same lights dancing through the trees. A mile later, a landslide had blocked the road. If we hadn't stopped, we'd have gone right into it." That stuck with him. In the years that followed, Daniel kept driving his routes through the Ozarks. And though he never saw the lights again, he always slowed down when the fog grew thick or the night seemed too quiet. Other drivers he spoke to had their own tales: white orbs floating near old bridges, red lights flashing through the forest like silent flares, or glowing figures standing near sharp turns before vanishing. Scientists had tried to explain it. Some blamed ball lightning, a rare natural phenomenon caused by electrical discharges in humid air. Others said it was car headlights refracting through mist. But none of those explanations matched the way those orbs moved, how they seemed alive, intentional, almost protective. Local folklore grew around them. Some called them spirit lanterns. Others believed they were the souls of those lost in mountain wrecks. eternally guiding travelers away from the same fate. A few even said the lights appeared to those at a crossroads in life, a sign to change course before disaster struck. Whatever they were, the people of the Ozarks treated them with quiet respect. When the mist rolled in and the forest glowed with strange, shifting light, no one honked or shouted. They just waited. Headlights dimmed until the orbs faded back into the trees. To this day, truckers traveling that lonely stretch of Highway 23 still talk about the haunting lights of the Ozarks, how they appear without warning, dance through the forest, and vanish just as suddenly. Some claim they're a trick of nature, others swear there's something beyond understanding. But those who've seen them up close, like Daniel Reeves, know one thing for certain: sometimes the dead don't haunt. To harm, they linger to warn. They're silent lights, flickering in the night, guiding the living safely through the darkness of the Ozark Hills. The night was cold and clear as trucker Sam Delaney made his way down Highway 20. Cutting through the heart of Idaho's rugged landscape, the road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt flanked by open plains and the faint silhouettes of distant mountains. It was past midnight, his favorite time to drive. The hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind through the side mirrors were the only sounds keeping him company. He was hauling timber from Boise to Idaho Falls, a route he had driven dozens of times before. But on that particular night, something felt different. The air felt heavier, quieter, almost like the world was holding its breath. Around mile marker 214, near the edge of Craters of the Moon National Monument, the road dipped into a long stretch of open desert. There were no streetlights for miles. Only the glow of his high beams cut through the darkness, casting pale light over the cracked pavement and patches of dry sagebrush. Then, out of nowhere, something darted across the road. At first, Sam thought it was a coyote. The shape was low to the ground, quick and dark against the light, but as it came into full view, his heart jumped. What he saw wasn't any ordinary animal. It was a large dog, or what looked like one, with fur so pale it almost glowed. Sam slammed the brakes, the truck skidding slightly as the massive vehicle groaned under the sudden stop. The headlights locked on the figure in the road. It was standing still now, right in the center of his lane. The dog's body shimmered faintly, as if made of mist or light. Its eyes reflected no color, just a dim, empty whiteness. Sam's breath caught. He blinked, trying to shake the exhaustion from his eyes, but when he looked again, the dog was still there. Then, without warning, it turned its head toward him and took a single step forward. That movement sent a chill through his entire body. He swerved hard to the right, narrowly avoiding what he thought was a collision. The tire screeched against the asphalt, and the trailer rattled violently behind him. When the truck came to a stop on the shoulder, Sam sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. His chest was pounding. He threw the rig into park, grabbed his flashlight, and climbed out. The night was dead still. The wind had stopped. Even the insects were silent. He walked back toward the middle of the road, scanning the ground for signs of what he'd seen. There were paw prints, large ones, pressed clearly into the dirt at the edge of the asphalt. But as he followed them, something strange happened. They grew fainter, shallower, until they disappeared entirely, just a few feet from where they started. No tracks leading away, no sign of the animal itself. It was as if the creature had simply evaporated. A low, uneasy feeling crept up his spine. Sam swept his flashlight across the roadside again, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. But there was nothing, only the open land and the quiet hum of the truck engine idling behind him. He climbed back into the cab, locking the door more out of instinct than reason. For the rest of the night, he couldn't shake the image of that ghostly dog standing in the road. Every time his headlights swept over the desert, he expected to see it again. When he finally pulled into a rest stop outside Idaho Falls just before dawn, Sam recounted the experience over coffee to another driver named Rick, a grizzled veteran of the highway who had been driving routes across the Northwest for decades. Rick listened, nodding slowly, then said something that made Sam's blood run cold. "You saw the phantom hound," he said quietly. "You're not the first." According to Rick, Drivers had been reporting sightings of a mysterious white dog on Highway 20 for years. Some said it appeared near the lava fields, others closer to Cary or Arco. Always late at night, always when the road was empty. Most who see it say the same thing, Rick continued. Big dog, pale as smoke, looks solid 1 second and gone the next. Some say it's a warning, others say it's looking for its master. That night, Sam went digging for stories online. To his surprise, he found a few. One came from a state trooper who'd been stationed near craters of the moon back in the 1980s. He claimed he'd nearly hit a white dog on patrol one night, but when he got out to check, there was nothing. There's just paw prints that ended abruptly in the dust. Another report, from a couple driving home from Arco, described a glowing animal crossing the road and then vanishing into thin air. Local folklore went even further. Some said the ghostly dog belonged to a prospector who had died in the desert over a century ago, his loyal hound wandering the wasteland, searching for him ever since. Others believed it was the spirit of a wolf hunted to extinction, haunting the highways that cut through its old territory. A few even said the dog appeared before accidents, its sudden crossing meant to warn drivers to slow down. A week later, Sam took the same route again. He told himself he wouldn't let the story get to him, but as the night deepened and the familiar signs of the highway rolled past, that uneasy feeling returned. Every patch of fog, every shadow in the headlights made his heart race. Then, near the same stretch by mile marker 214, something flickered in the corner of his vision. This time, he didn't swerve. He just slowed down, keeping his eyes on the road. A faint glow shimmered near the edge of the asphalt, shape barely visible, pacing silently along the shoulder. The ghostly dog, it didn't cross this time. It just walked beside him, matching the speed of the truck for several seconds. Then it turned its head, its pale eyes locking with his for an instant, before fading completely into the night air. Sam drove the rest of the way in silence, his heart heavy, but strangely calm. He couldn't explain it, but the experience felt less like a threat and more like a reminder, a message to respect the road, to stay awake, to keep himself safe. Today, truckers still talk about the ghostly dog of Highway 20. Some laugh it off as a myth, a trick of headlights and exhaustion. Others, like Sam, swear on their lives that they've seen it with their own eyes. The paw prints that vanish in the dirt, the glow that fades into the windproof. Perhaps that not all guardians wear wings. Some still roam the lonely roads, four-legged and silent, watching over those who pass through the night. It was just after midnight when truck driver Mike Hollis pulled off the highway somewhere between Tucumcari and Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The long haul from Amarillo had worn him down, and his eyelids felt like lead. The desert night stretched around him black and silent, broken only by the faint hum of his engine and the shimmering glow of a lonely neon sign ahead that read Sunset Vista Motel. He had passed it before, years ago, but never stopped. The sign flickered like an old movie reel, buzzing faintly in the dry air. He pulled into the gravel lot, noticing a few other vehicles already parked outside: an old pickup truck, a dusty station wagon, and a faded blue sedan. It was a relief to see signs of life in such an empty stretch of desert. The motel looked straight out of the 1960s, a single row of rooms with green doors, a flickering office light, and a soda machine humming near the corner. As he stepped out, the warm air smelled faintly of dust and sage. From the corner of his eye, Mike saw movement near the lobby. Two people, a man and a woman, walking inside. They looked ordinary enough, dressed in travel clothes, carrying bags. He grabbed his overnight bag and followed behind them. The lobby was small but clean, lined with faded desert paintings and a dusty ceiling fan spinning lazily above. Behind the counter stood a clerk, an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair tied back in a bun. She smiled politely and handed the couple a key before turning her attention to Mike. "Long drive tonight?" she asked in a soft voice. "Yeah," Mike replied, setting his wallet on the counter. "Just looking for a bed and a hot shower." She nodded and gave him a metal key with the number 5 etched into it. "Rooms around the corner. Coffee in the lobby at 6. We close the office at 1. He thanked her, signed the logbook, and noticed the couple from before walking down the hallway toward their room. Their voices echoed faintly something about getting an early start. Mike unlocked his room, flicked on the light, and tossed his bag on the bed. The air conditioner rattled in the window, and the smell of old carpet filled the space. He didn't mind. It was better than sleeping in the cab. After a quick shower, he sat on the edge of the bed and stared out through the thin curtains. The parking lot lay silent beneath a pale moon. The same cars were there, motionless under the flickering neon. Some time later, a low rumble woke him. He glanced at the clock, to 47 a.m. The sound came from outside, like a car engine starting and stopping. Curious, he pulled the curtain aside. The lot looked the same. Not a soul in sight. Something about the stillness bothered him. He slipped on his boots, stepped outside, and crossed the lot. The desert air had cooled, and a faint breeze rustled the dry shrubs. The office lights still glowed faintly through the front window. But as he approached, he noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, the interior dimly lit. Inside, the desk where the clerk had been standing was empty. No sign of anyone, no clerk, no guests, not even the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The air felt colder inside, unnaturally so. He called out softly, "Hello?" No answer. The guest logbook still sat open on the counter, pen resting where it had been hours earlier. He flipped through it, scanning the last few entries. His name was there at the bottom. The entry above his was written in neat, looping script, Thomas and Claire Morgan, room 3. He remembered them, the couple he saw earlier. He walked to the hallway where the rooms were lined up, in silence. The carpet muffled his footsteps as he passed each door. Room 3's door was closed. He knocked. Nothing. Knocked again, harder. Still silence. Something made him reach for the handle. It turned easily. The room was empty. The bed was made, untouched. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and detergent, like no one had stayed there in years. A chill crawled up his arms as he stepped back. When he returned to the lot, all the cars were still there, including the blue sedan he'd seen the couple driving. But they were nowhere to be found. No luggage, no sound, no movement from any room. It was as if the entire place had frozen in time. Feeling uneasy, Mike decided to leave. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway. The motel shrank in his mirrors until it was nothing but a dim, flickering glow in the darkness. By morning, he convinced himself he'd imagined it all, the exhaustion, the eerie quiet, maybe even the people. But when he stopped at a truck stop outside Albuquerque later that day, he couldn't resist asking around. He found an older driver named Earl, who'd been running the same route for years. When Mike mentioned the Sunset Vista Motel, the man's expression changed instantly. "You stayed there?" Earl asked, setting down his coffee. "That place burned down in the 80s. Mike blinked. "No, it didn't. I was just there last night. Rooms, clerk, guests, everything." Earl shook his head. "It's gone, friend. There's nothing there but a concrete slab and a few pieces of the old sign. You must have seen something else." Mike insisted, describing the cars, the couple, the old clerk. Earl listened quietly, then said in a low voice, "You're not the first to see it. That motel shows up now and then. Folks say it's like time folds back on itself out there. They see lights, hear voices, even check in. Then, when morning comes, it's gone." Later, unable to shake his curiosity, Mike reached out to a group of paranormal investigators based in Albuquerque. They'd heard of it too. They called it a residual haunting, a kind of echo trapped in time. The motel, they said, might have burned with guests still inside, replaying the same quiet night over and over. Long after the flames went out, when investigators visited the site a week later, all they found were remnants, a cracked foundation, a rusted sign frame, and broken pavement half swallowed by weeds. But their instruments recorded faint electromagnetic spikes and a cold pocket of air near where the office once stood. And the strangest discovery, fresh tire marks and footprints that led up to where the front door should have been, stopping abruptly in the dust. To this day, truckers driving that stretch of highway sometimes report seeing the faint glow of neon in the distance. They swear they glimpsed the outline of a building that shouldn't. T exists, one that flickers like a mirage before fading into the desert night. Some even claim they've pulled in, seen cars, and heard faint laughter or music coming from the rooms. But when they return, there's nothing. Only the wind sweeping across the empty lot, and a faint smell of smoke that lingers in the air, reminding them that in the heart of the New Mexico desert, the past sometimes refuses to stay buried. It was nearing 2:00 a.m. when long-haul trucker Ray Morgan found himself rolling down Interstate 95, deep in the quiet stretch of northern Florida between Daytona and Jacksonville. The highway was empty, the night air heavy with humidity, and the soft hum of his engine, the only sound breaking the stillness. It was one of those Florida nights when fog drifts low across the road like smoke, and the world feels paused in time. He'd been on the road for over 10 hours, hauling refrigerated goods up to Savannah. His headlights cut through the fog in a narrow tunnel of white light, revealing only a few feet ahead. The road was familiar, flat, uneventful, stretching through swampland and pine forests. But as he neared an old overpass that crossed the highway, a structure he'd passed 100 times before something made him slow down. A figure stood at the top of the overpass, leaning over the railing. At first, he thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker or someone in trouble. The figure's posture was unmistakable, hunched forward, both hands gripping the metal bars as they looked down toward the highway below. Ray's stomach tightened. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. That stretch of road had been deserted for miles. He slowed his rig, eyes locked on the shape. The headlights caught it fully as he drew closer. It looked like a man, tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be light-colored clothing that seemed to shimmer faintly in the mist. The face, though Ray couldn't see it clearly. It was like the fog itself had settled around it, blurring every feature. Something about the figure felt wrong. It wasn't just the way it stood, it was how still it was. Completely motionless, not even shifting or breathing. Ray rolled down his window, the night air thick and warm against his arm, and called out, "Hey, you okay up there?" No movement, no sound. He slowed even more, the massive truck hissing as the brakes caught. The figure didn't react. For a moment, he thought about pulling over entirely, maybe radioing it in. But then, as he rolled beneath the overpass, he looked up again and the figure leaned farther over the railing, as if peering directly down at him. Then it was gone. Not in a way that made sense, not stepping back, not running off. It simply dissolved. 1 second it was there, solid and visible in the beams of his headlights, and the next it vanished into thin air. Ray hit the brakes and stopped on the shoulder. His heart hammered against his ribs. He jumped out, the night swallowing him in silence. The only sound was the distant chirping of frogs from the nearby marsh. He craned his neck, staring up at the empty overpass. Nothing. No footsteps, no shadow, no sound of movement. Just fog rolling softly over the concrete barriers. Then came the cold. It started as a whisper of wind that slid down the overpass and wrapped around him. The Florida night had been humid and sticky moments before, but now the air turned sharp and frigid. His breath came out in faint clouds, something that should have been impossible in that heat. The cold seemed to seep straight into his bones, and it lingered far longer than it should have, chilling him for minutes as he stood there, frozen in place. He climbed back into the cab and slammed the door, locking it out of instinct. The steering wheel was cold to the touch. The air conditioning was off, but it felt like ice had formed on the inside of the windshield. Ray drove off without looking back. The next morning, he stopped at a diner just outside St. Augustine, over coffee. He recounted the experience to another driver, sitting at the car, grizzled man with years of highway stories etched into his face. When Ray mentioned the overpass, the man's eyes narrowed. "You talking about the old county line overpass?" he asked. Ray nodded. "Yeah, that's the one." The man leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're not the first to see him. Drivers been talking about that ghost for years. According to local lore, decades ago, a man had jumped from that same overpass. Some said he de-bent a trucker himself who lost control of his rig in a wreck that killed several people. Others claimed he was a traveler who broke down nearby and never made it out of the storm that rolled through that night. Whatever the truth, the story always ended the same. The apparition appears at the railing, staring down as if reliving the moment before he fell. Ray wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. He'd always brushed off talk of haunted roads as campfire nonsense. But the image of that shimmering figure stayed with him for days. When he got back to Jacksonville, he couldn't help but search online. To his surprise, he found several accounts describing the exact same thing: a ghostly man seen leaning over the overpass, usually late at night, usually vanishing as soon as anyone gets close. One post from a local paranormal group described an investigation at the site. They set up thermal cameras and EMF detectors along the bridge after reports of unexplained temperature drops and strange lights around 2:00 a.m. The same time Ray had seen the apparition, their instruments recorded a sudden cold spike, and the camera captured a faint, mist-like figure at the railing. Within seconds, it disappeared. Some theories suggested the phenomenon was a residual, haunting a kind of spiritual echo, replaying the final moments of a traumatic event. Others believed it was an intelligent haunting, the restless spirit of the man himself, forever bound to the place of his death. Whatever it was, one thing seemed consistent: the chill that followed. Dozens of witnesses described that same cold wind that lingered long after the apparition was gone. Scientists couldn't explain it. No nearby refrigeration units, no drops in barometric pressure, nothing environmental that could account for it. A few months later, Ray drove that stretch again. He told himself he wouldn't look up when he passed the overpass. But as his rig climbed the gentle slope toward it, he couldn't resist glancing upward. For a split second, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of pale light near the railing. He blinked, hardened. It was gone. This time, though, he didn't stop. He kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, eyes forward. The cab grew cold again, the temperature dropping sharply, without reason. The cold wind seemed to move through the cabin itself, brushing against his neck like an unseen hand. It lasted for nearly a minute before slowly fading away. He never saw the apparition again, but he never forgot that night. He'd tell the story to other truckers now and then, always in the same quiet tone. Most laughed it off. Some didn't. To this day, travelers on I-95 still report seeing the same figure leaning over the overpass railing, as though forever waiting, forever watching the empty highway below. And when they stop to check, there's nothing, just the echo of wind, the hum of tires on distant pavement, and that strange, lingering cold that reminds them they might not have been alone on the road after all. It was a fog-drenched night along the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The kind of night when headlights seemed to be swallowed whole, and even the white lines on the road appeared to fade into the mist. Truck driver Jack Hanlon had been hauling freight since dusk, his 18-wheeler humming steadily through the Appalachian foothills. It was after midnight now, that strange hour when the world feels thinner, when the line between the living and something else feels uncertain. Jack had driven this route dozens of times before. The turnpike was his lifeline through Pennsylvania's rugged heart, stretching through tunnels and valleys carved out of dark mountains. It was quiet, steady work. But that night, as the fog thickened and visibility dropped to just a few yards, he felt an unease he couldn't name. The CB radio hissed static. The hum of his tires felt louder than usual. The road ahead glowed faintly gray, as though lit from somewhere below. He was nearing a long bend, known locally as Deadman's Curve, a section of the highway notorious among truckers for its accidents. The road sloped downward into a narrow pass, and countless drivers had lost control here over the years. Jack had heard the stories: drivers who'd seen phantom headlights coming from the wrong lane, others who claimed to hear cries for help echoing from the trees. He'd laughed them off before. But as he approached the curve that night, something made him lift his foot from the accelerator. That was when he saw it. At first, it looked like a man standing on the shoulder, half shrouded in fog. The figure was waving frantically, both arms raised, motioning for him to stop. Jack's instincts kicked in. Maybe someone's car had broken down. Maybe there'd been an accident. He eased the truck to the side of the road, hazard lights flashing, the air brakes hissing against the damp night. As he came to a stop, he could see the figure more clearly. It appeared to be a man wearing what looked like a reflective vest or jacket pale, shimmering slightly under the beams of his headlights. The man's face, though, was shadowed, impossible to make out. Jack threw on his flashlight, grabbed his jacket, and climbed down from the cab. But when his boots hit the asphalt, the figure was gone. The fog swirled around him, silent and cold. He swept his flashlight beam along the shoulder, across the trees, even down the ditch beside the road. Nothing. No footprints. No car. No sound. It was as though the man had never been there at all. Jack called out, his voice echoing against the mountainside. "Hey, you need help." Only silence answered him. He felt a strange chill creep up his neck. The fog moved like smoke, curling in slow, deliberate patterns. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw movement at the edge of the tree line flicker, a pale shape slipping between the trunks. Uneasy, Jack climbed back into his cab. The air inside felt suddenly heavier, the silence pressing on his ears. He pulled back onto the highway, the red hazard lights fading into the mist behind him. As he drove, though, the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew stronger. It was a sense of being watched. Every few miles, he'd glance at his mirrors, half expecting to see someone in the reflection. The empty passenger seat seemed darker than usual, like a shadow had settled there. Once, he thought he caught movement in his side, mirror shape following the truck along the shoulder, keeping pace for just a second before fading away into the fog. Jack tried shaking it off. "Get a grip," he muttered. "It's just the fog." But the unease lingered. When he reached the next rest area, he pulled in, parked beneath the flickering lights, and stepped out to stretch. The air was still and damp, carrying the faint scent of pine. He lit a cigarette, trying to calm his nerves. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach twist. There, in the thin layer of dirt beside his truck's front tire, were footprints. Not just one or two, but several, leading up to the driver's door and stopping there. The prints were small, deep enough to suggest a man's weight, but they ended abruptly, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. Jack dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. He scanned the empty lot. Not a sound. Not a single vehicle besides his own. He climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. For the rest of the route, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still with him. The mirrors reflected strange shadows, shapes that shifted when he turned his head. Once, when he slowed near another bend, he swore he heard a voice, a faint whisper, like someone calling his name. The CB crackled suddenly, though no one was broadcasting, just static, followed by what sounded like a single word, drawn out through the distortion: "Stop." By the time Jack reached his destination outside Harrisburg, dawn was breaking, the fog lifting to reveal a pale blue sky. The sense of unease finally began to fade, but the memory of that figure on the roadside burned clear in his mind. A week later, he mentioned the experience at a truck stop diner. A few older drivers at the counter looked up when he described the location. One of them, a gray-bearded man with a raspy voice, nodded slowly. "You saw the roadside spirit," he said. Jack frowned. "The what?" The man leaned closer. "That stretch of the turnpike's cursed. Back in the 70s, a trucker jackknifed his rig right near Deadman's Curve. Lost control in the rain, went straight over the embankment. They say he was waving for help before the crash, but no one stopped in time. Folks still see him sometimes, trying to flag drivers down before they hit the same spot. Happens every few years. Always the same thing. A man in a vest, waving in the fog." Another driver chimed in. "My uncle saw him once. Said he stopped too. Said the guy disappeared before he got out of the cab. He never drove that route again." Jack sat back, silent. The memory of those vanishing footprints and that cold gaze from the fog flashed through his mind. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on him. But deep down, he knew what he'd seen. As he got back on the road later that day, he slowed when he reached that familiar curve. The sun was high now, burning away the mist, and everything looked perfectly normal. Still, as his truck rumbled past the guardrail, he found himself glancing at the shoulder one more time. For just an instant, in the shimmer of heat rising from the pavement, he thought he saw a figure, standing there, again motionless, waiting. Then it was gone. Even now, drivers whisper about the roadside spirit of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the restless soul of a man who waves desperately for help that will never come, bound forever to a stretch of haunted asphalt where time and tragedy refuse to let go. It was late evening on a lonely stretch of Route 127 in central Kentucky when long-haul trucker Tom McAllister first noticed the sound. The engine growl was unmistakable, deep, mechanical, and high-pitched all at once. But when he glanced in his mirrors, the highway behind him was empty. Tom had driven this route countless times, and the winding roads through rolling farmland were familiar. There should have been nothing there at all. He shrugged and kept his foot steady on the accelerator, the hum of his 18-wheeler filling the cab. The sky above was dark, scattered with stars that glimmered faintly through the haze of mist rolling off the nearby fields. For a while, the only sound was his own rig, the tires whispering against the asphalt. But then the engine noise returned closer this time, sharper, like something accelerating past him at impossible speed. Tom's heart rate spiked. He pressed the brakes slightly, keeping his eyes glued to the road ahead. That's when he saw it. A flash of chrome, a glint of headlights, and a rider leaned low on a sleek motorcycle, speeding past his truck as if propelled by some unseen force. The rider wore dark clothing, a helmet that reflected the faint moonlight, and his presence seemed almost tangible in the air itself. Tom's first instinct was to check for another vehicle. He flicked the high beams to the rearview mirror, but the road behind was empty. No headlights, no sound, just a fading echo of the engine that had already passed him. "What the hell?" he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He glanced at the GPS. Nothing. No traffic alerts, no nearby cars. He shook his head, trying to rationalize it may be some local kid on a dirt bike, speeding through the empty country road. But something about the speed and the precision of the rider's movement didn't feel right. The next few miles were unnervingly quiet. Tom's rig rolled down the empty asphalt, tires crunching against loose gravel near the shoulders. He could still feel the lingering vibration of the engine, a phantom echo that seemed to follow him, though no one was there. The hairs on his arms stood on end. The following morning, at a truck stop just outside Frankfort, Tom recounted the story to a few other drivers. One of them, a younger man named Jason, laughed nervously. "You sure it wasn't just a deer or something bouncing across the road?" Tom shook his head. "No, this was a motorcycle. I saw him. Clean and fast. He passed me like I was standing still. And the engine, don't think I'll ever forget that sound." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Funny thing, my cousin's got a dashcam rig in his truck. He's been on that stretch 100 times. Says sometimes it picks up motorcycles on video that nobody actually sees. Sometimes the cameras don't even show the bike at all." Tom frowned. He hadn't thought about checking cameras, but the idea lingered. Later that week, curious and a little unsettled, he contacted the local transportation office. They had traffic cameras along US 127, primarily for monitoring accidents and road conditions. When he asked them to review the feed from the night he'd driven, he was shocked by what they found. The footage showed Tom's truck moving down the highway, perfectly normal. There were no other vehicles, no streaks of light, nothing except for the faint, lingering sound of a motorcycle engine captured on the audio feed. No image of a motorcycle appeared on the video at all. Just the ghostly revving of an engine, rising and falling, seemingly without source. After that, Tom spoke to a few locals. Farmers and longtime drivers told him that stretch of road had a reputation, though most were reluctant to discuss it openly. Stories spoke of a motorcycle rider who had died decades ago. A young man involved in a fatal accident during a night ride home from a nearby county fair. Witnesses claimed he had crashed violently at the bend near Black Oak Ridge, and locals said his spirit sometimes returned. Motorcycles were heard but never seen, headlights streaking the fog like a shimmer of silver before vanishing into nothingness. Other drivers corroborated similar experiences. Some swore they saw a motorcycle streak past at impossible speed. Yet when they tried to stop or follow, the rider disappeared into thin air. Engine noise sometimes lingered for miles, echoing across the hills. leaving a disquieting vibration in the tires. Many believed it was the restless spirit of the rider, doomed to ride forever, never able to slow down, never able to touch the ground again. Tom returned to that section of us 127 months later, determined to see if the phantom appeared again. It was a cool, misty evening. He kept the dashcam rolling, his headlights cutting through the haze. For hours, nothing happened. He slowed down, half expecting another truck or vehicle, and then it came a flicker in the corner of his vision. The unmistakable gleam of chrome, the blur of a bike accelerating past him in the dark. He looked at the video afterward. Once again, the camera caught no motorcycle at all. Only his own rig, the fog, and the haunting, unexplainable rev of an engine that seemed to follow him long after the sighting. Since that night, Tom's friends noticed a change in him. He avoided driving that stretch alone at night. Others who had experienced the phantom rider said the same. There was something unnerving about the presence, something that felt alive and aware, something that watched drivers even when unseen. The legend grew quietly among truckers. The ghostly motorcycle rider of central Kentucky. It wasn't violent, never tried to harm anyone, but it had a message. Many believed a reminder of the fragility of life, of speed, of being too close to the edge. To see him was to witness a fragment of the past, forever etched into the night. To this day, drivers along US 127 report the same phenomenon. Headlights flash past on empty roads, engine noise echoes with no source, and the ghostly rider vanishes into the mist as if swallowed by the night itself. Those who encounter him never forget it's the fleeting image, the sound, the impossible acceleration, and for truckers like Tom McAllister, the memory serves as a warning. Some roads carry more than asphalt and gravel. They carry echoes that refuse to die. It was a late autumn night in Maine when trucker Carl Donovan drove his rig toward the Penobscot River, hauling a load of machinery bound for Bangor. The air was thick with fog, rolling in from the river like smoke over the water, obscuring the edges of the road and softening the glow of his headlights. The highway was deserted, the kind of silence that makes every hum of tires on asphalt feel unnaturally loud. Carl had crossed the Bangor Bridge countless times before. It was an old steel structure, its guardrails worn and rusted, spanning the dark waters below. He knew the route well, and the fog didn't bother him until that night, when the familiar landscape became unrecognizable under the heavy mist. About halfway across the bridge, something caught his eye. A dark shape at the railing, motionless, standing at the edge of the bridge. Carl slowed instinctively, squinting through the windshield. At first, he thought it was a persona pedestrian, somehow on the bridge at this hour. The figure was tall, lean, and completely black against the gray fog, leaning slightly forward as if staring down at the water below. Carl's heart rate spiked. He tapped the brakes, the tires squealing softly on the slick metal grates. The truck slowed, then crawled to a stop. He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down the steps to the passenger side door, trying to get a better view. "Hey," he called into the fog. "You need help." The figure didn't move. It didn't even seem to breathe. Its presence was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself had thickened around him. Carl's skin prickled. He could feel the chill coming off the bridge, but this cold was different and natural, sharp, crawling along his arms like icy fingers. Then, without warning, the figure was gone. Carl blinked, staring into the fog, expecting to see it retreat down the walkway or step away from the edge. But the space was empty. No footprints on the metal grates. No shadow cast on the fog. Nothing. Just the faint hum of his truck's idling engine and the river's whisper far below. He climbed back into the cab, heart pounding, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The air inside the truck felt suddenly colder, as if the chill from the bridge had seeped through the doors and windows. Carl shook his head, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the fog, his imagination stirred by exhaustion. But the cold lingered. It didn't fade as he drove off the bridge. It clung to the cab like a shadow, a reminder of what he had seen. By the time he reached the next rest stop, his mind raced. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe a lost traveler, a fisherman out late. But none of it fit. The figure had appeared suddenly, with no warning, and vanished just as quickly, leaving only a lingering chill. Carl wasn't the only one to notice strange occurrences on that bridge. Over the years, locals and drivers had told stories of a shadowy figure seen leaning over the railing, often during foggy nights. Some claimed it was the spirit of a worker who had died during the bridge's construction decades ago. Others said it was a soul lost to the river, forever trapped between the fog and the steel, watching over travelers who dared cross the water at night. Curious and unnerved, Carl looked up reports online. He found a handful of accounts, each eerily similar. Another wrote of a cold spot that followed him across the bridge, making his skin crawl even hours after leaving. One paranormal investigator suggested it could be a residual haunting, a replay of a tragic moment etched into the location itself, appearing to anyone sensitive to the energies of the bridge. Carl returned to that stretch of highway a few weeks later. This time, he drove carefully, eyes scanning the fog for any movement. The bridge rose ahead like a silver-gray ribbon, mist curling over its edges. Halfway across, his heart skipped a beat. There it was, again, a dark figure, standing at the railing. This time he kept the truck moving, eyes locked on the shape. As he approached, he could see no details, just a silhouette, so black it seemed to absorb the fog around it. He hesitated, breathing shallow, then tried to pass slowly. The figure didn't shift or react. And then, just as suddenly as before, it was gone. No movement, no sound, only a cold draft that wrapped around the cab of his truck. Carl felt it deep in his bones, the kind of chill that makes the skin tingle and the muscles tighten. After that night, Carl drove that route cautiously. He never stopped on the bridge, never got out, and never tried to investigate further. But the memory lingered. The way the figure had seemed both real and unreal, the icy cold that refused to leave, the oppressive weight of its presence. Other truckers confirmed similar experiences. Some described the figure leaning over the railing. Others spoke of sudden chills, strange engine noises, or inexplicable unease as they crossed the bridge at night. The stories all shared the same elements: fog, darkness, a lone figure, and the cold that followed. To this day, the bridge carries traffic as usual, a vital artery in central Maine. But those who travel it at night, especially in fog, often speak of feeling eyes on them, shadows moving at the edge of perception, and cold spots that seem to appear for no reason. For truckers like Carl Donovan, it is a reminder that some crossings are more than concrete and steel. They are places where the past lingers, where shadow and mist combine, and where a dark figure still watches silently over those who pass. Even now, drivers report seeing the shadow on the bridge, standing motionless against the fog, only to vanish moments later. And for those who experience it, the lingering chill is never forgotten, a whisper of the unknown, etched into the cold Maine night. It was a crisp, late autumn night when truck driver Ben Harris navigated his rig along Route 9 in central Massachusetts. The long haul from Springfield to Worcester had left him exhausted, and the highway stretched before him in the dim glow of his headlights, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through dark fields and dense woodlands. The air was still, heavy with a faint scent of fallen leaves, and the usual hum of traffic was absent. Route 9 was quiet at this hour, so quiet, in fact, that every sound seemed unnaturally amplified: the growl of his engine, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional distant call of a night bird. Around 1:30 a.m., as he rounded a gentle curve lined with thick trees, Ben noticed a car parked on the shoulder ahead. The vehicle was old, dark-colored, its taillights off, sitting perfectly still. At first, he thought it might be someone broken down, waiting for a tow, or stranded with a flat tire. He slowed his truck, the brakes hissing softly in the cold night air, and focused on the vehicle. The scene looked ordinary enough, yet something about it unsettled him. As he drew closer, he could see that there was no one inside the car. The windows were opaque from condensation, and the vehicle sat low and heavy on the asphalt, as though it had been there for hours. The eerie quiet amplified the sense that this car was out of place. Ben eased his rig to the side of the road, parking a safe distance behind. He killed the engine and stared. The night seemed to hold its breath. He reached for his flashlight, intending to check if the driver might need assistance. As he stepped out of the cab, a sudden gust of wind cut across the road, and for a brief moment, the trees rustled like whispers. Then, the car was gone. Ben froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. 1 second it had been there, solid and tangible. The next, it had vanished completely. There were no tire tracks leading onto the shoulder, no signs of skid marks, no impression in the gravel, nothing to suggest the vehicle had ever been there. The empty road stretched ahead as if the car had never existed at all. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he must be seeing things. Exhaustion, he thought, must be playing tricks on him. But the feeling that had gripped him, the sense of wrongness, refused to fade. Even as he climbed back into the cab, he could feel it, a subtle, unshakable sensation that he was being watched. Once he resumed driving, that sensation followed. For miles, Ben felt the invisible gaze of something tracking him. Every so often, he glanced into his mirrors, half expecting to see the car reappear, or some shadow lurking in the trees along the roadside. But nothing ever came. Only the silent, dark stretches of Route 9, illuminated by his headlights cutting through the night. By morning, he had reached Worcester, but the memory lingered like a shadow in his mind. At the truck stop, where he parked for a brief rest, he spoke to a few fellow drivers about the stretch of road. One older driver, a man who had spent decades hauling freight across New England, nodded knowingly when Ben described the vanishing car. "That part of Route 9's got a reputation," the man said, his voice low. "You're not the first to see something unusual. Folks talk about cars that appear and disappear. Drivers feeling like they're being followed, or that they're never truly alone on that stretch. People call it the Watcher Road." Ben listened, intrigued and unnerved. Others chimed in with similar experiences. A young couple had reported seeing a car parked along the shoulder only to find it gone moments later. A delivery driver claimed he felt chills running down his spine as if someone unseen were walking beside his truck, and a commuter had pulled over at a rest stop, convinced that a passengerless vehicle had been tailing him all the way from the forested curve outside Northampton. Curious, Ben researched the area after his route. He discovered that the corridor of Route 9, where he had seen the vanishing car, had a history of mysterious incidents. Over the years, there were reports of cars that seemed to appear out of nowhere, drivers claiming to feel watched, and countless near-miss accidents where no other vehicles were found. Local legends spoke of a restless spirit of a driver who had died in a collision decades ago, whose presence was said to manifest in phantom vehicles. Some theorized the spirit was trying to recreate the night of its death, a spectral replay that materialized briefly before dissolving into the night. The more Ben read, the more he understood why so many drivers avoided that part of the highway at night. Stories described the sudden feeling of being observed, the eerie quiet punctuated by sounds with no source, and the inexplicable appearances of vehicles that seemed real enough to touch but disappeared when approached. Scientists and skeptics dismissed it as fatigue, optical illusions caused by fog, or overactive imaginations. But for those who had witnessed it firsthand, the encounters carried a weight that could not be ignored. Months later, Ben found himself back on the same route. This time, during a rainy night, the highway was slick, fog thick, and headlights reflected off the wet asphalt in long streaks. He approached a familiar shoulder carefully, glancing for any sign of the phantom car. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something in the distance, a glint of metal, the faint outline of a sedan parked beside the road. He slowed instinctively, heart pounding, but when he got closer, it was gone. Not in the sense that it had turned or driven away. It simply wasn't there. Ben drove on, unease settling in his chest. The feeling of being watched returned, lingering for the rest of his journey. Even after the highway lights faded behind him, the sense of eyes on his back remained a subtle, disquieting reminder that some places hold echoes of the past that refuse to disappear. To this day, truckers and night travelers along Route 9 report similar experiences. Cars that appear and vanish without a trace. The unsettling sensation of being observed. And for those who have encountered the vanishing vehicle, the memory never truly leaves a haunting presence, lingering in the foggy Massachusetts night. waiting along the roadside for the next traveler to pass. It was a long, lonely night on the Alaska highway, and trucker Sam Reynolds had been driving for over 14 hours. The dark stretches of road seemed endless, lined by towering spruce and pine, their silhouettes barely visible in the pale glow of the moon. The northern sky was clear in some spots, but the northern lights flickered faintly on the horizon, casting a ghostly green shimmer over the asphalt. Exhausted and hungry, Sam decided to stop at a small, nearly deserted rest area just past the Yukon border. The lot was empty, save for a single maintenance truck parked near the entrance. He pulled his rig into the lot and killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in after hours of tire, hum, and wind. The cab smelled of coffee and diesel, his supplies of snacks rattling gently in the side compartments. Sam unclipped his seatbelt and leaned back for a moment, closing his eyes to stretch. The night was crisp, the cold air seeping through the slightly cracked windows. When he opened his eyes, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart skipped a beat. There, in the passenger seat, sat someone or something slouched, casually, watching him. Sam blinked, thinking he must be imagining things, but the figure remained. The passenger was indistinct at first, a shadowed form, yet unmistakably human in shape. The outlines of a jacket and head were visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. What startled him most was that the seatbelt was fastened, snug across the chest of this unknown occupant, as if the figure had buckled in carefully before settling into the seat. "Hey," Sam said cautiously, his voice low. "Who's there?" No reply. He turned his head fully toward the passenger, his eyes straining in the dim light, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw a faint movement, the tilt of a head, a subtle shift in posture. Then, just like that, the passenger was gone. The seatbelt remained fastened, the buckle still clicked into place, but the seat itself was empty. Sam's stomach knotted, a chill running down his spine, despite the heating system still humming in the cab. He reached out, his hand hovering over the seat. Nothing. No warmth, no figure. Just the cold leather of the passenger chair beneath his fingers. Sam leaned back slowly, trying to rationalize what he'd seen. Fatigue, maybe. Hours of driving through the dark, endless highway. His mind must have been playing tricks on him. Yet, the seatbelt remained fastened, taut across empty space, and that simple detail made his rationalizations falter. It was impossible to ignore. He shook his head and tried to focus on the mundane. Checklists, paperwork, route times, but the feeling persisted, a subtle, uncanny awareness that he was being observed, as if the empty seat still carried the presence of something watching him. The Alaska highway was known for its long, isolated stretches, where drivers often spent hours alone with only the wind and the occasional moose to keep them company. But Sam had heard stories from other truckers about strange occurrences at night. Lights that appeared in the forest with no vehicles to produce them, shadows crossing the road just beyond headlights, and fleeting figures glimpsed in mirrors that vanished before anyone could investigate. He had never believed them, dismissing the stories as folklore. Yet now, seated in his cab with a seatbelt still fastened across an empty chair, he began to reconsider. After a few minutes, he started the engine again, the vibrations of the rig grounding him in reality. He drove slowly through the rest area, scanning the lot, but there was nothing, no figure, no movement, only the dim outlines of the maintenance truck and the surrounding forest. Still, the sensation lingered. Every glance at the passenger seat sent a shiver through him. The seatbelt stretched taut across nothingness, a silent reminder of what had appeared and vanished. Hours later, as Sam continued along the highway, the sense of being watched remained. He caught himself glancing repeatedly at the passenger side mirror, half expecting to see the shadowy figure reappear. At the next checkpoint, he spoke quietly to another driver, a woman hauling timber northbound. Ever seen someone in your cab that wasn't there?" he asked, careful to keep his voice low. The woman nodded, her expression somber. "A few times. Some say it's the spirit of someone who died on this highway, hitching rides with drivers who spend too long alone. I don't know if it's true, but you never forget it when it happens." Sam nodded, unease settling in his chest. He didn't press for more information. He didn't need to. The highway was long, the night was deep, and he had already experienced enough to know there were things out there that didn't fit within his understanding of reality. Later, when he finally reached a well-lit rest area near Whitehorse, he stopped for a proper break. He got out of the cab, breathing in the frigid night air, and glanced at the passenger seat one last time. Empty. Still, the memory of the figure, the taut seatbelt, and that silent, watching presence remained. He could feel it lingering, a quiet weight in the cab that would not leave. Since that night, Sam never traveled the Alaska highway without checking the passenger seat. He kept his seatbelt unbuckled, a small act of preparation against the unknown. Other truckers shared similar stories, brief appearances of shadowy passengers, fleeting companions who vanish before they can be acknowledged, leaving only the cold reminder that the long highway is not always empty. For those who drive the Alaska highway at night, the phantom passenger is a quiet legend. A reminder that solitude on the road can sometimes be broken by the inexplicably presence that appears, watches, and vanishes, leaving no trace but the taut strap of a seatbelt and the lingering sense that someone somewhere is sharing the ride. It was a quiet, late night along Highway 50 in Nevada, famously known as the loneliest road in America. Truck driver Lucas Harlan had been hauling a refrigerated load from Reno to Ely, covering miles of empty asphalt that cut through the desolate high desert. The stars above were clear, brilliant against the black sky, and the wind whispered faintly over the sagebrush lining the highway. The night was calm, eerily so, and Lucas felt the familiar isolation settle over him as he cruised along at a steady 60 miles per hour. He had driven this route countless times, but the stretch ahead, between Austin and Eureka, always carried a sense of unease. Few towns, few cars, and only the faint hum of his rig to break the monotony. It was in this silence, about 2 hours past midnight, that Lucas first noticed something unusual. A thick haze began to roll across the asphalt, curling over the guardrails and desert scrub, swallowing the lines on the road. At first, he thought it was natural fog, a common occurrence in the colder desert nights. But as he approached, it thickened unnaturally fast, blanketing the highway in a solid wall of white. Within moments, Lucas slowed, his eyes straining against the limited visibility. The headlights barely cut through the dense mist. He tapped the brakes lightly and eased his rig to a crawl. The silence inside the cab grew heavier, oppressive, as though the fog absorbed sound itself. Then he noticed movement, shadows shifting just beyond the glow of his headlights. He blinked, unsure if fatigue was playing tricks on him, but the figures were unmistakable. Human-shaped, dark silhouettes moved slowly, gliding along the roadside and sometimes stepping directly onto the pavement. They seemed unaware of him, their forms semi-transparent, ethereal, as though they were projections from another world. Panic gripped him, but he was rooted behind the wheel, unsure if stopping or accelerating would provoke something he could not predict. As if that weren't unsettling enough, faint lights began to hover just above the highway. They were small, white orbs at first, dancing in the mist like fireflies. But they moved with intention, zigzagging between the figures, sometimes hovering directly in front of his windshield before darting away. Lucas's heart pounded. He had driven these roads for years, but never anything like this. He reached for his CB radio, hoping to call for assistance, or at least break the tension with a familiar voice, but only static answered. The fog seemed to swallow sound as effortlessly as it swallowed light. The figures drifted closer, and Lucas could see them with more clarity. Their movements were unnatural, jerky yet fluid, as if reality itself struggled to contain them. Faces were featureless, smooth voids, but their presence was oppressive, pressing against the cab as though they were peering directly at him through the metal walls. He could feel the hair on his arms stand on end, goosebumps forming along his neck. Every instinct screamed for him to get out, to drive away, but the rig felt heavier, sluggish, as though the fog itself was resisting his escape. Then, almost as suddenly as it had arrived, the fog began to lift. The shadows receded into the desert scrub. The floating lights flickered and disappeared, and visibility returned to normal within seconds. Lucas blinked repeatedly, struggling to process what had happened. The highway was once again empty, silent, and still. The desolate expanse stretched ahead as if the fog, the figures, and the lights had never existed. Despite the return to normalcy, Lucas couldn't shake the sensation that lingered, a deep, pervasive sense of dread. His hands remained tight on the wheel, knuckles white, and every stretch of the road felt different, darker somehow, as though the landscape itself had shifted in the presence of whatever he had just witnessed. Even miles later, the emptiness of Highway 50 felt heavier, more oppressive, as though unseen eyes followed his rig through the desert night. When Lucas finally stopped at a small rest area near Eureka to gather himself, he recounted the experience to a few night shift truckers. Most listened politely, nodding, but none seemed surprised. One older driver leaned back in his seat, cigarette smoke curling toward the low-hanging lights. "That part of Highway 50," he said quietly. "Yeah, it gets weird sometimes. Fog comes out of nowhere, figures walking in the mist, lights hovering over the road. Not much you can do but drive through it and hope it lets you pass." Lucas asked if anyone else had reported seeing the same things. The driver shrugged. "Few and far between. Most don't talk about it. Some people just call it the lonely highway's ghosts. Others think it's the desert itself, playing tricks on folks who were alone too long." Lucas couldn't shake the memory of the faceless figures or the floating lights, and he thought about the unnatural speed with which the fog had appeared and vanished. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the glowing orbs weaving through the mist, hear the soft hush of the desert amplified by the fog, and feel the cold dread pressing against his chest. The legend of Highway 50 had grown quietly among long-haul drivers. Some swore the fog appeared to warn travelers away from unseen dangers. Others believed it was a residual haunting or replay of unknown tragedies that had occurred along the lonely road. And then there were those who claimed the fog and its apparitions were conscious, aware, feeding on the isolation and fear of those who dared drive the highway at night. Lucas continued, making the trip between Reno and Ely, but he drove with extra caution after that night. Headlights on high, CB radio tuned, eyes scanning the desert edge for any sign of movement. Even when the road was empty, even when the fog seemed far behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The lingering presence of shadowy figures and floating lights, the memory haunted him long after the trip ended, and he told himself he would never travel that section of Highway 50 alone at night again. For those who drive the Nevada stretch of the lonely highway, stories of mysterious fog, shadowy figures, and glowing orbs persist. The fog appears, suddenly vanishes just as quickly, and leaves behind the same unshakable dread that Lucas felt, an invisible weight pressing against anyone who dares to drive alone, a reminder that some roads carry more than asphalt and distance. They carry echoes of the unknown, waiting silently in the mist. It was a late autumn night in the Appalachian Mountains when trucker Mark Simmons navigated the winding stretch of highway between Asheville and Boone, North Carolina. The highway was quiet, the kind of desolate stretch where even the hum of a big rig's tires seems amplified in the still air. Mark had driven these roads countless times, hauling freight through the rugged mountain passes. But tonight felt different. He could sense a heaviness in the air, as if the shadows among the trees were watching him. Around midnight, as he rounded a sharp curve flanked by dense woods, Mark caught a glint of light just beyond the tree line. At first, he thought it was the reflection of his headlights on wet leaves, or a deer's eyes catching the light. But the moment he focused, he realized the glow was higher than a deer's and more fixed, like it was staring directly at him. Mark slowed, gripping the steering wheel tightly, the cab filled with the low rumble of the engine. The glowing eyes were unnervingly still, fixed in the darkness between two tall oaks, reflecting the headlights like tiny lanterns in the night. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise, an instinctive warning that something was off. Heart pounding, he leaned closer to the windshield. The eyes blinked in unison, small pinpoints of greenish-gold light piercing the shadows. They seemed to track his movement, following the truck as it inched closer. Mark called out reflexively, "Hello, who's there?" His voice sounded absurdly loud in the silence, swallowed by the mountains. The eyes didn't move, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Mark took a deep breath and tried to rationalize what he was seeing. A mountain bobcat, perhaps, or an owl reflecting his headlights. But the shape behind the glowing eyes suggested something larger, more deliberate. He could see the faint outline of a figure, crouched low, hidden partially by the thick underbrush. Mark eased the truck forward, trying to get a better view, but before he could react further, the eyes vanished. 1 second they were there, the next, gone as if they had melted into the darkness. The sudden absence left a strange emptiness, an eerie void where the sensation of being watched persisted. Curious and unnerved, Mark parked briefly at a pullout just past the curve to inspect the area. He stepped out of the cab and shined his flashlight into the woods, scanning the tree trunks and thick foliage. That's when he noticed them deep scratches gouged into the bark of 2 large oaks near where the eyes had appeared. The marks were long and jagged, fresh, as though something with immense strength had clawed at the trees in a frantic or angry motion. The pattern seemed unnatural, too high for a bear or other large mammal to make. Mark stepped back, unease prickling his skin. The scratches were too deliberate, too precise, and the ground beneath them was undisturbed by footprints. He could find no tracks, no signs of human presence, only the rough marks on the trees and the lingering darkness around them. The air felt colder here, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Mixed with something else, he couldn't identify, a faint metallic temps that made his stomach tighten. He climbed back into the cab, locking the doors, and tried to shake off the feeling. The glowing eyes, the sudden disappearance, and the scratches all lingered in his mind, replaying in vivid detail. The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the mountains, but every shadow beyond the tree line seemed alive. Even miles later, Mark could feel the eyes on him, following his rig silently, watching from the darkness as he drove. The following day, at a truck stop near Boone, Mark shared his experience with a few fellow drivers. One older driver, a man who had been navigating the Appalachian roads for decades, nodded knowingly. "Those mountains hold more than just trees and deer," he said quietly. "People have seen the eyes before, glowing in the dark, watching you from the trees. Some say it's a spirit, a guardian of the forest, angry or just curious. Others claim it's something that's never truly human, something that hunts the dark when the roads are empty." Mark listened, unsettled, as the older driver described sightings remarkably similar to his own. Glowing eyes in the distance, vanishing figures, scratches on trees with no footprints nearby, and the feeling of being watched for miles after leaving the scene. Truckers often avoided driving alone through these parts late at night, especially on foggy or moonless evenings, when the shadows seemed to move more freely and the eyes appeared more frequently. Determined to understand, Mark later researched local folklore. Legends spoke of creatures that roamed the Appalachian woods, neither fully animal nor human, watching travelers and marking trees with claws or talons. Some were considered protectors of the forest, punishing those who disrespected the land. Others were more malevolent, luring unwary drivers into the darkness. While skeptics dismissed these tales as myth, Mark's experience convinced him there was some truth to the stories. Months passed, but the memory of the glowing eyes never left him. Whenever he drove that stretch of highway, he remained alert, checking mirrors, scanning the tree line, and keeping one hand poised on the horn. Even when the road was empty, even when the sun rose and the trees looked benign, he felt the lingering presence of whatever had watched him that night. Other drivers, he discovered, had experienced similar encounters. The glowing eyes, the vanishing figures, the mysterious scratches, they were recurring phenomena along the Appalachian highways. For those who had seen them, the experience left an indelible mark, the unnerving certainty that the mountains were alive, watching, and that sometimes their gaze followed you far beyond the trees. Mark Simmons never forgot the night of the haunting eyes. The image of those glowing lights, the sudden disappearance of the figure, and the deep scratches on the bark replayed in his mind every time he passed through the Appalachian Mountains. It was a reminder that some roads, no matter how familiar, carry secrets in the shadows. waiting patiently for the next traveler to witness the impossible. Even today, travelers along the Appalachian highways report the same eerie sightings: the sudden appearance of glowing eyes in the trees, the vanishing figures, and the scars left behind on the forest around them. Those who experience it know one thing for certain: the mountains are watching. And the haunting gaze of the unknown follows long after the road straightens and the forest falls silent. It was a cold, clear night on Interstate 70 in Colorado, and trucker Ryan Coleman was driving westbound through the Rocky Mountains. The snow-capped peaks glistened under a silver moon, and the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and winter frost. The highway was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the occasional headlights of a distant car piercing the night. Ryan had driven this stretch countless times, hauling freight from Denver to Grand Junction, but the isolation always made the road feel longer, the dark stretches more unforgiving. Around 11:45 p.m., as he approached a long, straight section of highway near Vail, Ryan noticed movement ahead. A figure appeared in the middle of the lanes, illuminated briefly by his headlights. At first, he thought it must be a stranded motorist or a hitchhiker, though the idea of someone walking along I-70 at night seemed reckless. The figure was human-shaped, tall and thin, standing perfectly still in the center of the asphalt. Ryan immediately slowed, tapping the brakes and easing his rig closer. His heart rate quickened, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. The figure didn't move, as cars often do when startled. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, almost aware of his approach, its presence demanding attention. "Hey, you okay?" Ryan called out, his voice carrying across the empty highway. His words seemed to vanish into the still mountain air. The figure remained motionless. The glare of the headlights reflected off something in its eyes, or at least, he thought he saw them glint, small points of light piercing the darkness. A strange sensation washed over him, a mix of curiosity and fear, as if the figure was both there and not there simultaneously. Ryan slowed even further, inching toward the pedestrian, trying to give room for whatever help might be needed. But as he drew near, the figure vanished. One second it was standing in the lane, the next, it was gone. No shadow, no movement, nothing to indicate where it had gone. Ryan slammed on the brakes instinctively and glanced around. There were no signs of the figure retreating to the shoulder or the surrounding snowbanks. It had simply vanished. He stepped out of the cab, flashlight in hand, scanning the asphalt and the surrounding areas. The road was empty, pristine, with not a single footprint in the fresh frost. The snow on the shoulders was untouched. It was as if the figure had never existed at all. Ryan's chest tightened. The wind that whistled through the mountain passes now seemed heavier, almost suffocating, carrying with it a coldness that seeped deep into his bones. He climbed back into the truck, shaking, and tried to rationalize what had just happened. Exhaustion. The darkness playing tricks on his eyes. Maybe a shadow among the snow or a trick of the headlights. Yet the feeling of being watched, of having something so present vanish in an impossible way, refused to leave him. The emptiness of the highway seemed deeper somehow, the darkened stretches longer, as though the figure's absence had left a hollow imprint along the asphalt. Ryan continued driving cautiously. The image of the phantom pedestrian burned into his memory. Every shadow along the road, every movement among the trees or snowbanks, made him flinch. His mirrors reflected empty lanes, yet he felt the lingering sense of eyes following him, the subtle impression that the figure might reappear at any moment. At a rest area near Glenwood Springs, Ryan recounted the encounter to a few fellow drivers. An older trucker listened intently, nodding knowingly. "You saw one of the highway ghosts," the man said quietly. "I've driven I-70 for decades, and a lot of us have seen him." The figure, walking in the middle of the road, disappears the moment you get close, leaving nothing behind. No tracks, no prints, just gone. Some say it's a spirit of someone who died on the road. Others think it's just the mountains playing tricks on your mind when you alone out here at night. Either way, it spooks drivers good. Ryan found that several other truckers reported similar experiences along the same stretch of highway. Drivers described seeing a lone figure, usually at night, standing or walking in the lanes. The figure never spoke, never moved when approached, and vanished the instant headlights came too close. In some cases, the same phantom pedestrian appeared multiple times, always eluding observation, leaving the highway untouched and ordinary in its wake. Local legends suggested the ghost was a former traveler, someone who had perished on the icy roads or in a collision years ago. Some believed the spirit appeared to warn drivers of danger, while others claimed it sought company, replaying the motion of life it had been denied. Paranormal investigators often cited the mountainous terrain and reflective surfaces as contributing factors. Yet many drivers swore the experiences felt too real, too deliberate, to be mere illusions. Months later, Ryan found himself driving the same stretch again. The wind howled through the passes, the road slick with frost, and the moon hung low over the peaks. He passed the same curve where he had seen the figure before, his eyes scanning the lanes carefully. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a dark silhouette standing ahead, illuminated by the headlights. His heart leaped, but when he drew closer, the figure vanished again, leaving the asphalt as empty and untouched as if nothing had been there. Ryan never forgot the encounter. Every drive along I-70 at night, he remained alert, the memory of the phantom pedestrian lingering like a shadow on the road. Other drivers, he discovered, carried similar memories of fleeting presence that appeared and vanished, leaving no trace but an unsettling sense of being watched. For those traveling I-70 in the Colorado mountains, the story of the phantom pedestrian serves as a warning. Some nights, when the highway is quiet and the dark stretches seem endless, a lone figure may appear in the middle of the lanes, and when it vanishes without a trace, it leaves behind more than emptiness. It leaves a lingering unease, a reminder that even the loneliest roads may not be as empty as they seem. It was a sweltering summer night in the Utah desert when trucker Jake Mitchell was hauling a load of construction materials along a remote stretch of highway between St. George and Moab. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a landscape of red rock mesas, jagged cliffs, and sparse vegetation, bathed in the harsh glow of the moon. The air was dry and heavy, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust stirred up by the occasional gust of wind. Jake had driven this road countless times, but the solitude of the Utah desert always felt different at night. The long stretches of asphalt seemed endless, and the silence around him was profound, broken only by the low rumble of his rig's engine. As he rounded a bend near a particularly isolated mesa, he noticed something unusual on the shoulder ahead, a recreational vehicle parked at a slight angle, its headlights off. At first, Jake assumed it was someone camping or taking a rest. He slowed, curious. The RV looked intact, but there was no one visible inside or around it. It was an older model, beige, with faded stripes along the sides, sitting in the desert like it had been abandoned for years. The tires appeared firm, the vehicle stable, yet the setting felt off. Jake parked his truck a safe distance behind, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out. The desert air was still, almost unnaturally so, and the faint smell of fuel drifted toward him. He circled the RV, shining his light around the tires, windows, and doors, but found no signs of life, no footprints in the sand, no camping supplies, nothing. It was quiet, too quiet, and the darkness beyond the vehicle seemed to press in. "I guess it's empty," he muttered to himself, though the uneasy feeling in his chest told him otherwise. After a few moments, he returned to his cab, deciding he'd continue driving. He glanced once more at the RV, and the sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. Hours later, as he passed the same spot on his return trip, he slowed again. The RV, which had been there earlier, was gone. The asphalt and the desert shoulder were completely empty, not even tire tracks to suggest it had driven away. The air, however, carried a strange, scent-burned fuel, sharp and acrid, lingering in the night as though the vehicle had combusted and vanished. Jake's heart raced. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he might be hallucinating, tired from the long haul. But the memory of the RV had been vivid, the way it had rested on the shoulder, the outline of the windows, the odd heaviness in the air around it. Now it was gone, and the emptiness of the desert made the disappearance even more surreal. He slowed his rig, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The desert was still, the mesas casting long shadows under the moonlight. There was nothing. It was as if the RV had never existed, yet the smell of burned fuel lingered stubbornly, a phantom trace that clung to the night air. Jake shared the encounter at a small truck stop in Moab the next morning. The other drivers listened quietly, some nodding knowingly. One older driver, a man who had spent decades hauling freight through Utah and Arizona, leaned forward and spoke. "You saw it, didn't you? The vanishing RV," he said. "It's been happening out here for years. Parked vehicles appearing on the side of the road and gone before anyone can get close. Some swear you can still smell fuel, like it left a trace behind, but there's never a single mark to show it was ever there. People say it's spirits of travelers lost in the desert. Others think it's just the desert playing tricks on your eyes, especially at night when you're alone." Jake nodded, the story confirming the unease that had settled in his chest. He wasn't the only one who had seen something inexplicable on that stretch of highway. Other drivers recalled similar experiences, campers or RVs parked along the shoulder, figures glimpsed inside or moving around, only for the vehicles to vanish when approached. No tracks, no debris, no sign that they had ever existed, just an eerie scent, a residual reminder of what had been. That night, as Jake prepared for another run along the desert highway, he couldn't shake the memory. He drove with extra caution, eyes scanning the roadside for any anomaly, ears straining for the hum of an engine or the sound of doors opening and closing. The desert stretched endlessly, the dark highway a ribbon cutting through a sea of red rock and shadow, and every isolated pullout carried the potential for another inexplicable sighting. The vanishing RV phenomenon had earned a quiet notoriety among long-haul drivers. Some dismissed it as hallucination or fatigue, the result of long stretches of monotony, punctuated by desert heat and isolation. But for those who had experienced it firsthand, like Jake, the events carried a weight that could not be explained away. The desert felt alive in a strange way, almost conscious, capable of manifesting and erasing objects at will. Weeks later, Jake passed the same area again, and although the shoulder was empty, the memory of that night stayed with him. He thought about the RV, its sudden appearance, and the lingering smell of burned fuel. Even in broad daylight, the stretch of highway seemed different, more ominous, more expectant, as if it held secrets that only revealed themselves in the lonely hours of night. For truckers and travelers along this remote section of Utah, the story of the vanishing RV serves as a chilling reminder that the desert is full of mysteries. Vehicles appear without explanation, vanish without a trace, and leave behind sensations and smells that refuse to fade. The phenomenon is as unsettling as it is inexplicable, a silent warning that the vast, lonely highway can harbor things that exist only long enough to be seen and vanish just as quickly, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of fuel and the cold weight of uncertainty. Even now, long-haul drivers who traverse the Utah desert at night speak in hushed tones about the vanishing RV. Some have seen it, some have felt it, and all who encounter it carry the same unshakable unease, knowing that, in the endless desert, even what seems solid can disappear in an instant. It was a stormy night on U.S. Route 14 in South Dakota, the rain hammering against the windshield of trucker Sam Lawson's big rig. The asphalt gleamed under the headlights, reflecting the relentless downpour that blurred the edges of the road and the distant outlines of the Black Hills. Sam had driven this route countless times, hauling supplies between Rapid City and Pierre, but nights like this, when the storm seemed to swallow sound and distance, always made him uneasy. As he rounded a curve near a sparsely wooded stretch just outside Deadwood, Sam spotted a figure standing on the shoulder. The person was hunched against the rain, soaked and shivering, thumb extended in the classic gesture of a hitchhiker. Sam hesitated, scanning the empty highway behind him. Few cars passed along this route during the night, and the storm made stopping dangerous. Yet something compelled him to slow. The figure raised a hand, nodding in silent appeal. Sam eased the rig to the shoulder, rolling down his window just enough to speak. "You okay? You need a ride?" The hitchhiker nodded but didn't speak. Wet hair plastered to their face, and clothes clung tightly under the pounding rain. Sam gestured to the cab. "Hop in. I'll get you somewhere safe." The figure climbed into the passenger seat silently, dripping water onto the floor mats. Sam noticed there was no luggage, no bag, nothing to suggest they were traveling. The cab was heavy with the scent of rain and wet asphalt. And for a moment, the only sound was the windshield wipers swishing back and forth, keeping the downpour at bay. Sam tried to make conversation. "Where you headed?" he asked, glancing at the passenger. The hitchhiker didn't answer, only stared straight ahead, their eyes obscured by shadows from the dashboard light and the rain streaking the window. A chill seemed to seep from their form, a cold that made the cab feel suddenly smaller, heavier, and oddly silent, despite the storm. Sam shook off the unease and focused on the road. The highway stretched straight and wet before him, bordered by blackened trees that bent under the wind and rain. After a few miles, he slowed at a particularly isolated bend where the road opened slightly, offering a small shoulder and a view of the surrounding hills. Glancing at the passenger again, Sam realized they were gone. The seat was empty. The wet hair and dripping clothes vanished as if they had never been there. Panic gripped him, and he quickly stopped the truck, the tires hissing against the rain-slicked pavement. He jumped out, flashlight in hand, and scanned the shoulder. There were wet footprints leading from where the hitchhiker had appeared, stretching across the asphalt and onto the gravel shoulder. But after a few feet, the footprints stopped abruptly. No sign of where the person had gone, no trail into the woods. No movement through the rain. Nothing but the disappearing impressions on the shoulder. Sam's heart pounded. He retraced the steps with his flashlight, shining into the trees and across the empty road. The storm made every shadow appear alive, the wind carrying whispered echoes that might have been his imagination. The only thing left was the faint scent of wet clothing and rain, lingering in the cab and on the asphalt. He climbed back into the rig, hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The storm seemed heavier now, pressing against the cab with a strange intensity. The image of the silent, soaked hitchhiker replayed in his mind's eyes, hidden, face pale, voice never heard. Despite the disappearance, the memory of their presence was vivid, unshakable, and deeply unsettling. When Sam finally reached a truck stop in Rapid City, he recounted the encounter to a few fellow drivers. Most listened politely but skeptically, nodding along. One older driver, a man who had been hauling freight across the Black Hills for decades, leaned forward. "You picked up one of them, didn't you?" he said quietly. "The ghostly hitchhikers happens out here on stormy nights. People see them standing on the road, wet from the rain, asking for a ride. They never speak, never leave a trace except for those wet footprints. And just as suddenly as you see them, they vanish gone into the night, leaving nothing but a chill and the memory of them." Sam nodded, unable to find words. The older driver continued, explaining that sightings of ghostly hitchhikers along South Dakota highways were common enough among night drivers to be considered part of local lore. Most stories involved stormy nights, deserted stretches of road, and silent figures that appeared suddenly and disappeared without explanation. Some said the spirits were travelers lost in accidents, still seeking rides home. Others believed the hitchhikers were warnings, protecting the living from danger on isolated roads. Despite the explanation, Sam could not dismiss the feeling of unease that lingered long after that night. Whenever he drove through the Black Hills during rainstorms or on late-night hauls, he scanned the shoulders, wary of figures appearing suddenly in the headlights. Even empty stretches of road seemed alive with the possibility of another encounter. Another silent passenger materializing and vanishing in seconds. Weeks later, Sam passed the same stretch of US Route 14 again. The storm clouds hung heavy, and the rain began to fall steadily. He slowed instinctively, scanning the shoulder for the telltale shape of a wet figure, thumb raised in a silent plea. None appeared, yet the memory of the previous night stayed with him. He could feel the phantom presence as clearly as if it was sitting beside him in the cab. For truckers traveling the South Dakota highways, the ghostly hitchhiker is a legend and a warning. Silent, wet, and transient, these figures appear in storms and on lonely roads, vanish without a trace. and leave only the faint impression of footprints and the memory of their presence. Those who have encountered them speak of chills that linger, a quiet unease, and the certainty that some travelers never truly leave the road. Sam never forgot that night. The image of the silent, soaked hitchhiker, the sudden disappearance, and the wet footprints that faded into nothing replayed in his mind every time he drove through the Black Hills. The highway seemed forever altered, carrying the memory of the ghostly presence and the reminder that even the most familiar roads can conceal the impossible. Waiting patiently for the next night driver to witness the unexplained. It was a late autumn night on Interstate 44 in Missouri, and trucker Luke Harris was making his usual haul, a load of machinery bound for St. Louis. The highway stretched through the Ozarks, empty except for the occasional distant car. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the long hours of driving made the road feel longer, darker, and more isolated than usual. The hum of his rig's tires on the asphalt was steady, almost hypnotic, until a sudden flash of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, Luke assumed it was a fellow driver passing him, but as he glanced back, the lights stayed too close, too synchronized. The vehicle behind him was another truck, almost identical to his own, keeping a perfect distance and matching every subtle movement of his rig. Every swerve, every acceleration, every brake Luke applied, the truck behind mirrored exactly. There was no passing, no honking, no signals, just a shadow following in perfect lockstep. A shiver ran down Luke's spine. He knew these roads well, had driven them hundreds of times, but nothing in his experience explained what he was seeing. The headlights seemed too precise, almost deliberate, as if the other truck was an extension of his own rig. He tried to shake the unease, telling himself it was fatigue, perhaps a trick of the dark or the reflective nature of the wet asphalt, but the movements were too exact, too deliberate, to dismiss so easily. Luke tried to change lanes, hoping the truck would pass, but it stayed locked behind him, maintaining perfect synchronization. Panic began to creep in as he considered pulling over at the next exit. The stretch ahead was isolated, with no signs of civilization for miles. Just empty road and dense forest. The truck's silent, unwavering presence felt unnatural, almost alive, and Luke's unease grew with every mile. Finally, he spotted a pullout along the highway, a small gravel shoulder where he could safely stop. He eased his rig off the asphalt and brought it to a halt, heart racing. The lights of the mysterious truck blinked once, almost acknowledging his stop. Then, in the blink of an eye, the truck was gone. No fading taillights, no slow retreat into the distance. Nothing. The rearview mirror reflected only darkness, and the empty stretch of highway ahead was silent. Luke climbed out of the cab, flashlight in hand, scanning the shoulder and the nearby trees. The gravel was undisturbed, no tire marks leading off the road, no signs that the truck had ever been there. Even the asphalt behind him showed no evidence, as if the truck had never existed. A chill ran through him, deeper than any night air could cause, and he felt an unease that would not dissipate. At the next truck stop, Luke recounted the experience to fellow drivers. Some laughed it off as fatigue, a hallucination born of long hours on the road. But one older driver, a man who had spent decades hauling freight through Missouri, leaned in with a knowing expression. "You saw it," he said quietly. "That stretch of I-44 has a reputation. Drivers report seeing rigs appear out of nowhere at night. They follow exactly, mirroring every movement, and the moment you stop, they vanish. No tire marks, no trace, nothing at all." Luke listened as other truckers confirmed similar encounters. Reports of identical trucks appearing behind night drivers, following them mile for mile, then disappearing without a trace, were more common than most people realized. Some called it a ghost truck, a phantom of the highway. Others believed it was a spirit of a driver lost long ago, eternally replicating the movements of others to warn or haunt. Each story carried the same pattern. A perfect shadow, mirroring movement, vanishing instantly. Weeks later, Luke returned to that same stretch of Interstate 44. The night was clear this time, but he remained vigilant, eyes scanning the distance and rearview mirror. Every shadow, Every distant glint of light set him on edge. He never saw the phantom truck again, yet the memory lingered, vivid and chilling. The image of the silent companion, its movements perfectly synchronized with his own, haunted him. Even in daylight, he could recall the way it appeared, without warning, and vanished without a trace. The vanishing truck companion has become a whispered legend among Missouri truckers. It appears suddenly, follows precisely, and disappears, leaving no physical evidence, but an unforgettable impression. Those who encounter it leave the highway with a lingering sense of unease, knowing that some roads are not as empty as they appear. Even familiar stretches carry the memory of the phantom, a silent presence that watches, mirrors, and vanishes, leaving only fear and the certainty that the highway can hold secrets far stranger than anyone expects. For Luke Harris, the memory of that night remains vivid. The empty highway, the mirroring rig, and the sudden disappearance are etched into his mind. He drives the Missouri roads cautiously, always aware that somewhere behind him, on an isolated stretch of asphalt, a shadow may be following, moving in perfect sync, waiting for the moment to vanish into the night. It was a cold, foggy night on a remote stretch of U.S. Route 26 in Oregon. Truck driver Ryan Carter was hauling a load of lumber through the Coast Range, a road he had traveled countless times. The highway twisted through dense forests, the tall evergreens barely visible through the thick fog that clung to the asphalt. The rhythmic hum of his rig's tires on the wet pavement was the only sound, interrupted occasionally by the whistle of wind through the cab. The isolation always made him uneasy, but the fog that night felt heavier, almost alive. As Ryan rounded a curve near a narrow pass, he noticed something ahead on the road. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer stepping into the lane, but as he drew closer, the shape became unmistakably human. A pale figure stood motionless in the middle of the highway, its outline faintly glowing in the dim light filtered through the fog. There were no reflective strips, no headlights of a vehicle behind it, just a single, silent figure staring straight ahead. Ryan slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the wet pavement. The figure did not move, did not flinch, and yet the presence of it felt overwhelming. A chill ran through the cab, creeping along his spine, and the air seemed to thicken around him. He fumbled for words, calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" But there was no response. The figure remained still, almost as if waiting for him, until the moment he braked completely. Then, in an instant, it began to dissolve. It didn't walk away or vanish in a conventional sense. It simply melted into the fog, disappearing as though it had never existed. Ryan sat frozen, heart pounding, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The highway was empty again, silent except for the low hum of his truck, but the unease lingered. For hours afterward, Ryan could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow along the roadside seemed alive, every rustle in the trees a potential echo of the specter he had seen. The encounter left him shaken, the memory vivid and terrifying. The fog seemed to carry the figure with it, an imprint of fear that refused to dissipate even as he drove farther away. The next morning, Ryan recounted his experience to other drivers at a truck stop. Some dismissed it as fatigue or a trick of the fog, but a few nodded knowingly. One veteran driver spoke quietly, leaning in close. "You saw the highway specter," he said. "That stretch of Route 26 is infamous. Drivers see it on foggy nights, a pale figure standing in the middle of the road. And then, just like that, it dissolves. Some say it's the spirit of someone who died there. Others think it's residual energy from past accidents. Either way, anyone who sees it remembers." Ryan listened as other truckers shared similar encounters. A ghostly figure appearing suddenly in the lane, freezing drivers with fear, then vanishing completely. The details were always the same: the pale, indistinct form, the overwhelming sense of dread, and the sudden disappearance into the fog. The highway specter had become a whispered legend among night haulers, a cautionary tale that carried weight in the long hours between rest stops. Weeks later, Ryan returned to the same stretch of road on another night run. The fog was lighter, but he drove cautiously, eyes scanning the shoulder and the lanes ahead. Every shadow, every patch of mist made him tense. remembering the figure's pale presence and the way it had dissolved before his eyes. Even though he never saw it again, the memory of that night lingered, a heavy weight pressing at the edges of his consciousness. For drivers traveling the isolated roads of Oregon, the highway specter is more than a ghost story. It is a silent presence that appears suddenly, stands motionless in the lane, and vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only fear and the lingering sense of being watched. Some say it warns travelers of danger, others claim it is a lost spirit unable to move on. Whatever the truth, those who encounter it do not forget. The highway, especially at night and in the fog, carries the memory of the specter, a reminder that even familiar roads can hide something otherworldly, waiting to appear when least expected. The story of the highway specter has become a quiet legend among truckers on Route 26. The pale figure, appearing without warning and dissolving into the fog, serves as both a warning and a chilling mystery. For Ryan Carter, and many others like him, the highway is never quite the same again. The fog, the winding asphalt, the dense forests, they all seem to carry the specter's presence, a silent, haunting reminder that some roads are not as empty as they appear. And so, dear viewers, our journey through America's haunted highways comes to an end. 25 chilling encounters from truck drivers who braved the open road and encountered forces beyond comprehension. These stories remind us that the road is not always empty, the night not always safe, and some travelers are never truly alone. If you ever find yourself driving through the dark and desolate highways, keep your eyes sharp, your mind alert, and remember, some passengers never board the truck, they follow you home. Thank you for riding these haunted highways with me. Until next time, keep your headlights bright, your courage steady, and remember, on the road of the unknown, anything can appear and disappear.